Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club, we're featuring The Inner Level by Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett. It's a new book. The subtitle is How More Equal Societies Reduce Stress, Restore Sanity, and Improve Everyone's Well-Being. This is in Chapter 6, The Misconception of Meritocracy, page 161. Boris Johnson, the former mayor of London who became Foreign Secretary in Theresa May's Conservative government in 2016, was educated at Eton and Oxford. Giving the Margaret Thatcher lecture to a think tank in 2013, he articulated the view that economic equality will never be possible because some people are simply too stupid to catch up with the rest of society. Quote, whatever you may think of the value of IQ tests, it is surely relevant to a conversation about equality that as many as 16% of our species have an IQ below 85, he said. Comparing society to a box of cornflakes, he praised inequality for creating the conditions under which the brightest triumph. Quote, the harder you shake the pack, the easier it will be for some cornflakes to get to the top, end quote. Inequality, quote, is essential for the spirit of envy and keeping up with the Joneses that is, like greed, a valuable spur to economic activity. Whether or not Johnson is quite as clever a cornflake as he presumably likes to think, he certainly is not in command of the facts. Nobel Prize-winning economists, as well as the OECD and IMF, have shown how inequality, far from spurring on economic growth, leads to stagnation and instability. Social mobility is reduced where income inequality is greatest, and far from inspiring innovation, it turns out that there are actually slightly more patents granted per head of population in more equal countries. And as we've seen in the previous chapters, there's also the undeniable human cost of our fixation with keeping up with the Joneses. But Boris is far from alone in his misconceptions about the relationships between inequality and ability. The idea that people are naturally endowed with differences in ability, intelligence, or talent, and that those differences then determine how far up the social ladder they reach, is a powerful popular justification for social hierarchy. The presumption is that we live in a meritocracy in which the key to status is ability. We think of society as shaped like a pyramid. The supposition is that most people are near the bottom or only a little above it because the bulk of the population lack the special talents that we imagine people need to get to the top. The belief that differences in ability are the main influence on where people end up on the social ladder is so strong that we tend to judge everyone's personal worth, ability, and intelligence by their position in society. Nor is this confined simply to how we judge others. It also affects how people see themselves. Those at the top often believe that they're there because they are naturally endowed with plenty of the right stuff, just as many of those near the bottom think that their low status reflects a lack of ability. That picture, however, is not supported by the latest scientific evidence. First, research now shows that a very major part of what happens to people and where they end up is the result of totally unpredictable influences and occurrences amounting to pure luck. Second, aside from luck, the most important links that exist between ability and status operate in the opposite direction of that imagined by most people. Rather than different endowments of talents determining position in the hierarchy, it's much nearer the truth to say that position in the hierarchy determines abilities, interests, and talents. But let's address luck first. Whether or not we consider ourselves successful, most of us can probably look back across our own life histories and recognize the roles that luck and chance have played in getting us to where we are. We're perhaps lucky with schools or teachers, with the questions on an important exam, with some nameless person dealing with university applications, or we got on well with an interviewer when applying for a job. Perhaps a chance meeting was important, or perhaps an opportunity for promotion came up unexpectedly. Finding a life partner is just as important for our quality of life as our career or income, but we are far happier to acknowledge that chance and luck played a key role in meeting that person than we are in acknowledging luck's role in our career. No one minds mentioning the chance meeting, the circumstances that put you both at ease with each other, or the shared interest that might easily have gone unrecognized. The role of chance makes people's lives highly unpredictable. Although there are huge social class biases in social mobility, there are at the same time vast numbers of people moving up or down the social ladder in ways that even the most detailed analysis of parenting and ability fail to predict. Similarly, although there are differences of perhaps 10 years in the average life expectancy of upper and lower social classes, That explains very little of the individual differences in how long people live. Inevitably, some rich people will die young, and some people live in poverty to a great age. And as some public health mavericks used to say, even if you exercised, ate healthy, and didn't smoke, your most likely cause of death was still heart disease. In addition to all this, there may be a large element of chance in whatever our experiences, including subjective experiences, trigger the kind of epigenetic changes affecting subsequent development that we discussed in the last chapter. Just as the development of weather systems is sometimes said to be so chaotic it can be changed by the flapping of a butterfly's wings, so what amounts to chance events at the social or the cellular level are now thought to play a very substantial part in our lives. So much so that scientists have worried that if random chance and luck are such important determinants of whether or not an individual becomes sick, gets good exam results, or has a good marriage, it becomes difficult to understand causal pathways at all and to do anything about preventing or remedying bad outcomes. The book, The Inner Level by Wilkinson and Pickett. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time of the book, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And happy Monday. Boy, what a week this is going to be. There's scheduled impeachment hearings on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Having gone through this last week, with 2 different days that kind of blew up our show, and, we just basically played the hearings for you. I'm going to try, and some of this will be dependent on exactly who's testifying and what the testimony is about, all that kind of stuff. And certainly we'll play straight through the testimony when they're being questioned by the lawyers, for the 2 sides, because that seems to be really the most revealing stuff. But I'm inclined, increasingly aggressively inclined, to offer my commentaries and thoughts and riffs and even take your calls while the Republicans, when they go to the 5-minute back and forth, when the Republicans are speaking, because, it's become, unless they change their strategy. I mean, if their strategy becomes insanely entertaining, that might be interesting. But up until now, the Republican strategy has been to either try to create moments where they can whine and claim, grievance, this massive victimhood. The lead of that has been Elise Stefanik, where she would try to jump in and say something, and then Adam Schiff would say, "You're out of order," and she'd say, "Oh, are you trying to shut me down again?" And she knew. I mean, this was just pure performance. She was trying to create a clip that Fox News would play over and over and over so she could get herself reelected, with Trump supporters in her district in New York. And it may have backfired. I mean, this is the 21st District of New York State, and Elise Stefanik is a 3-term congressperson from there. And this woman, Tedra Cobb, is running against her. Tedra, back in 1999, she's been living in this area for over 30 years. She met and married her husband there. She's raised 2 kids there. In 1999, she started a community health agency through the St. Lawrence Initiative to provide access to critical health screenings and treatment. She has a daughter with a pre-existing condition. She had to have back surgery when she was young. In 2002, Tedra Cobb, who is running against Elise Stefanik, in 2002, she ran for a seat on the county legislature and passed some substantial ethics reform and a successful initiative to lower the cost of prescription drugs. And now she's running, and it says on her website, tedracobb.com, Now Tedrick is running for Congress because Elise Stefanik has repeatedly voted against the interests of Northern New Yorkers and Americans by voting to kick millions off their health insurance, to raise the cost of prescription drugs, and to allow insurance companies to discriminate against those like my daughter Ada who have pre-existing conditions. So most people, I think, didn't even know who Tedrick Cobb was. But when Elise Stefanik went nuts last week with her, "Oh, you're not letting me talk, Mr. Schiff," stuff, George Conway, Kellyanne Conway's husband, maxes out, gives the maximum donation allowed by law to her, which I think is $2,700 or whatever it is, and then tweets to everyone. He calls Stefanik lying trash, and he tweets to everyone, "Support Tedrick Cobb," and she raises like $1 million in a day. So things are getting interesting, shall we say. But the main point that I want is me scratching my head this morning. And I would love to get your thoughts on this. Is Trump going to Walter Reed on Saturday? I mean, you know, Trump usually goes golfing when he has nothing on his schedule on Saturday. This is the laziest president in history. He spent most of his presidency playing golf or in one of his hotels. So why did Cadet Bone Spurs go to the hospital? I have a theory about this. And I shared this theory on Twitter over the weekend, and, you know, a number of people said, well, yeah, maybe, and a number of people said, no, you're nuts. But, you know, not a lot of people are buying this story that Trump just woke up and said, you know, I'm sitting here in the White House, and down in the basement, there is a fully equipped, essentially emergency room, right? I mean, you know, if he wanted to have some blood drawn to find out what his cholesterol is like, they've got that in the basement of the White House. If he wanted to get an EEG and find out how his heart is doing, they can do that in the basement of the White House. They've got a portable unit. If he wanted to have his blood pressure taken, or if he wanted somebody to listen to his heart, they could do that in the basement of the White House. They've got a clinic, and they've got a full-time 24/7 doctor who basically lives there. I mean, you know, he's completely on call. Trump did not have to leave the White House for anything other than some sort of major medical emergency, or to set up a 25th Amendment way of getting out of being president without being impeached and without committing a crime and without being declared crazy. Let me lay this out for you. I mean, as I said, if he had, you know, people are saying, well, what if he had a minor heart attack? Maybe he did. He could have gone downstairs in the White House and checked it out. Well, maybe he did. Maybe he went to his doctor in the White House, and his doctor looked at the EKG and said, you need to get to the hospital. And by the time he got to the hospital, the situation was resolved. I mean, who knows, right? But here's how it works. The 25th Amendment has been discussed a lot by Democrats and in the media in the context of the vice president and the cabinet getting together and saying, this guy is nuts and out of control. And therefore, we're going to declare him unfit for office, non-compos mentis, you know, not mentally competent, and recommend that he be removed from office. That's always been a long shot. But the 25th Amendment, while it could provide for that, was actually written in 1965. It was written 2 years after JFK died. And it was to allow for, I mean, you know, the question was, what if Kennedy had been shot, you know, I mean, he was shot in the back and he was shot in the head, right? What if the shot in his back had not killed him? What if it merely knocked him out of service, basically, for a few months while he had to recover? And Lyndon Johnson had to become acting president. Well, we need a system for this. It's not in the Constitution. And so they wrote the 25th Amendment for a physically disabled president. That was the intent. So here's my conspiracy theory, and tell me if you think this is crazy, or if you have an alternative theory. Trump had, I think you could safely say, the worst week of his entire presidency last week. His buddy Roger Stone, his longest political advisor, he's known Roger Stone for 30 or 40 years. Roger Stone was convicted on all counts, And by the way, several of those counts had to do with Roger Stone conspiring with Donald Trump, WikiLeaks, and possibly Russia. So Roger Stone gets convicted of what may be crimes that Trump was involved in. At least that's what the evidence suggests. He had 2 impeachment hearings, right? You had Taylor and Kent, and then you had Yovanovitch. And all of them made it look like Donald Trump is a criminal. When Yovanovitch was testifying, he tweeted an attack on her, thinking that that might take her down a peg over at Fox News. And instead, everybody, including Chris Wallace on Fox News, says, whoa, shouldn't have done that. And he's going, oh, my God, I screwed up again. And then Holmes, this guy who was, at the lunch with Sondland, testifies. He's going to testify this week. He's going to be, one of part of the testimony that we're going to get this week is from Mr. Holmes. And Holmes testifies, right up front and right out loud. Let me see when Holmes is coming. Well, maybe he's not this week. Anyhow, he testified before Congress that he overheard the call that Trump's right in the middle of this conspiracy, and then Rudy now is looking at a possible criminal indictment himself, and he's denying he did anything. But Lev and Igor are saying, hey, we were working for Trump, not just Rudy. Trump pulled us aside at the Hanukkah party at the White House last year in 2018. So this was 11 months ago. Donald Trump pulled us aside, Lev and Igor and Rudy, the 3 of us, and said, I'm going to send you guys on a secret mission to Ukraine to get dirt on Joe Biden. And Lev went on to tell several friends about it. So he's got a documented trail, and there were photos of it. So Trump has this going on, and he's thinking, okay, I'm screwed. How do I get out of the White House without going to jail? Well, the simple way would be to come up with a physical disability, see if they can find anything wrong or make something wrong, or get the White House doctor to come up with something that he can say is wrong. So he can go to Mike Pence and he can say, Mike, turns out I've got a mitral valve misfunction, and I just can't be president anymore. It's too stressful. It could cause a heart attack. So you need to invoke the 25th Amendment and declare me physically incapable of being president. And then I'll step down if you'll pardon me and the entire Trump crime family, and you get to be president. And I get to leave the White House without ever admitting that I did anything wrong. I'm leaving the White House for the same reason that I was able to get out of the Vietnam War. Back then it was bone spurs, right? Now it's not bone spurs, it's a mitral valve misfunction or whatever, or I've got an artery with a embolism or something. He's going to come up with something. And so he gets to leave without being impeached. He won't go down in history as the guy who was impeached. He'll simply go down in history as the guy who was 73 years old as president, and his age caught up with him, and he just had to leave office. And he and his whole family were entirely part of, Pence will do it the same way Jerry Ford did. Our long national nightmare is over, and so we don't have to dig back into that and keep reliving it every other day. We're going to stop the hearings. We're going to stop the investigations. We're going to stop the indictments because I'm issuing a blanket pardon. Now, in the case of Nixon, Pat Nixon, his wife, and his kids, Trish and, is there another kid? I remember Trish and there was somebody else, were not committing crimes, right? They there wasn't a Nixon crime family, although there were a bunch of guys with Nixon. But in the case of Trump, he's going to have to pardon the whole damn family. What do you think? Am I onto something?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Julie was the other Nixon daughter. Anyhow, so what do you think? We'll be right back with your calls and more of the news of the day. Boy, is there a pile of it. And welcome back. Oh, let's see here. Albert in St. Louis, Missouri. Hey, Albert, what's on your mind today?
Yes, Tom. Hello?
Yeah, thanks for watching Free Speech TV, Albert. You're on the air.
All right. The reason I like your theory, and the reason I called is I think that Trump had a third play here, a third rail that he was working on with this Ukrainian thing.
Okay.
Obviously, if he holds up the money, he can increase the pressure on the president to make the statement, right?
Right.
Of course, the hold up of the money helps the Russians, all right?
Right.
And, of course, he cripples the new president right off the bat.
Yep.
But
And
now
also dirties him up so that in the next election, the country may flip back to another, kind of pro-Russian Poroshenko kind of guy. Or not
Weakens
Poroshenko, the guy preceding him. Anyhow, back to you.
Yeah, he weakens the country. I mean, there's no way Ukraine comes out good in this scenario.
Right.
It's a lose-lose for them. But now he's holding up $390 million. And we know he's been pilfering money from all over the government for the wall, right? Now he's sitting on $390 million. I think his ultimate play was before the year ran out, just before the year ran out, he was going to swing that money over to the wall.
Oh, it's not impossible. It's not impossible.
I don't think he intended to give it to him. The money.
Yeah, I mean, he had to steal money from schools for military children.
Right.
From upgrading health facilities for active duty service members, from housing, from military housing on bases in the U.S. and overseas that had rats and mold and asbestos and all kinds of problems that was supposed to be fixed and upgraded. Trump took all that money and threw it down at the wall. And so certainly, if he's willing to screw American soldiers, you'd think he'd be willing to take some money from Ukraine. That makes a lot of sense, Albert.
Yeah, all right. That's my idea. Have a good day, Tom. Like the show.
Thanks a lot, Albert. Good to hear from you. Mike in Lomita, California, listening on KPFK. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I've heard about this Walter Reed visit the first time this morning, and my immediate reaction was somewhat like yours. I thought laying the groundwork for a leaving office to spend more time with his doctors.
Right.
But I remember 2
or with
weeks
his accountants.
Before, yes.
In his money bin.
And his lawyers, and I'll have to have real ones this time. No, but 2 weeks earlier, someone predicted that he would be doing something to harm himself, acting out in a predictably delinquent fashion. And I think Friday was a prime example when he took to Twitter to threaten Ambassador Yovanovitch.
Right.
And I think maybe one of the reasons for going to Walter Reed rather than staying in the White House is that they have access to diagnostic tools there, which they don't have at the White House, like a CT scanner
or an MRI,
and complete blood tests.
Right.
So if he was experiencing sorts of symptoms which he normally would have just sort of ignored and denied, with that sort of an exit plan in the back of his mind, he says, "Oh, I'm feeling dizzy this morning. I should go get the docs to check."
Yeah, it's entirely possible. And in fact, if that was the case, it would probably be either a panic attack, which I think is the most likely, which comes across as a heart attack. I had a panic attack in my 30s in Germany, and I thought I was having a heart attack. And I went to a hospital. Or it could have been a minor heart attack. I mean, who knows? But Mike, I think, very real possibilities. Mike, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. So was it that Trump had a panic attack or a very small heart attack, something like that, and figured, okay, what we've got here in the White House just isn't enough. I need to go someplace where there's something big like an MRI or a CAT scan, some major diagnostic tools? Or did he come to the realization Friday that my goose is cooked, and I got to get, I've got to have something that I can give to Mike Pence to get out of this? What do you think? Sam in Minneapolis, listening on AM 950. Hey, Sam, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I just wanted to mention that I think we know from the Michael Flynn indictment and several other indictments that have come out of the Mueller probe that Pence absolutely knew what was going on, and he's been intimately involved with these schemes.
Right.
And I think that the Democrats and the impeachment hearings really need to surface that evidence with the testimony, and it needs to be in public. It needs to be on camera. It needs to be hammered home again and again, such that it can be added to the counts of the impeachment proceedings, such that when it actually gets released, it's not just Trump being impeached, it's actually Pence as well. So there can be no backdoor deal with Pence to basically
right. Strategically, that's a very, very, very risky proposition, because I agree with you. There's just an overwhelming amount of evidence that Pence, not only knew about this, but was in on it. I mean, he had that meeting in Warsaw with Zelensky, with the president of Ukraine, and reiterated
Absolutely.
that he wanted, investigations of corruption. And everybody knew that was code for Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. But
Exactly.
Here's the thing. If they include Pence, and by the way, that might make Pence far more willing. There's two sides to this. Pence would be far more willing to go along with the 25th Amendment, get Trump out on a bone spurs thing, and just like Trump got out of the Vietnam War. If he thought that it was possible that if Congress keeps digging, they're going to uncover dirt on him. So I think that strengthens my theory. But on the other hand, if the Democrats include Pence in the impeachment list, then that means that if both Trump and Pence go down together, Nancy Pelosi becomes president. That radically reduces the possibility that you're going to get 20 Republicans in the Senate to vote to remove them from office. So it could backfire terribly on the Democrats. Unless what?
Sure. Unless the proceedings surface the culpability of many of the Republicans in the Senate.
Right. If there's, some of that is popping up here and there too, but yeah, it's getting real interesting here, Sam. It's getting very, very interesting. Sam, great thinking. Thanks for the call. I appreciate it. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So do you think Saturday was Act 1 in a 3-act play where Donald Trump gets to skate with no consequences for him or his family? Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Fred Kaplan's new book, The Bomb: Presidents, Generals, and the Secret History of Nuclear War. This is from the introduction. For 30 years after the Cold War ended, almost no one thought, much less worried, about nuclear war. Now, almost everyone is fearful. But the fear takes the form of a vaguely paralyzed anxiety. Because of the long reprieve from the bomb's shadow, few people know how to grasp its dimensions. They've forgotten, if they ever knew. The holiday from history began on August 8th, 2017, when President Donald Trump, barely 6 months in office, told reporters at his golf resort in Bedminster, New Jersey, that if the North Koreans kept threatening the United States with harsh rhetoric and missile tests, quote, they will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen, end quote. Even those who didn't remember President Harry Truman's similar description 72 years earlier of the atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima, Truman said, a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. It was clear that in language more bellicose than any president since the end of World War II, Trump was talking about launching nuclear weapons at North Korea. not if its leader, Kim Jong-un, first attacked the United States, but merely if he developed the ability to do so. Then, 6 months later, Trump signed and released his administration's Nuclear Posture Review, a 74-page document that called for building new types of nuclear weapons and integrating them with the military's conventional war plans. In short, for treating nuclear weapons as normal. The red lights flashed. The alarm bells rang furiously. Yet here is what few recognized. None of these notions were new. The president himself seemed a departure from the norm. His character, erratic, eruptive, thin-skinned, willfully uninformed, a combustive mix for a world leader with his finger on the button. But the button and everything around it were the same. In those decades when most of us chose to forget the bomb, as global tensions calmed and fallout shelters crumbled and we turned our gaze to other problems and pleasures, the nuclear war machine continued to rumble forth in the beyond top secret chambers of the Pentagon, the Strategic Command Headquarters in Omaha, the weapons labs in various parts of the country, and the think tanks whose denizens never stopped thinking about the unthinkable. They all kept at their singular task, wrestling with the dilemmas posed by the bomb's existence. How to deter nuclear war. How to fight a nuclear war if it cannot be deterred. How to win it if such a thing is even possible. This is the nature of the nuclear era, and the era never drifted into suspension, even if our attention did. Trump snapped us out of our slumber, reminded those of us who were old enough to know, and informed those who weren't, that the bomb is still here. In public over the years, officers and officials have described America's nuclear policy as a second strike deterrence. If an enemy strikes us with nuclear weapons, we will retaliate in kind. This retaliatory power is what deters the enemy from attacking us. In reality, though, American policy has always been to strike first preemptively, or in response to a conventional invasion of Allied territory, or to a biological or large-scale cyber attack. In any case, not just as an answer to nuclear attack. All of these options envision firing nuclear weapons at military targets for military ends. They envision the bomb as a weapon of war, writ large. This vision has been enshrined in the American military's doctrines, drills, and exercises from the onset of the nuclear era through all its phases. Most presidents have been skeptical of this vision, morally, strategically, practically, but none of them have rejected it. Some have threatened to launch nuclear weapons first as a way of settling a crisis. The few who considered adopting a no first use policy, in the end, decided against it. There are rationales for these doctrines, drills, and exercises, and for the retention of the first use option. They are driven by policies, personalities, and bureaucratic rivalries, but also by a logic which, once its premises are accepted, hurls its adherents and the rest of us into a rabbit hole of increasingly bizarre scenarios that seem increasingly, if strangely, rational the deeper they're probed. Understanding the nuclear era, the era of our lifetime, means understanding the rabbit hole, who dug it, and how we got stuck inside. It means tracing the maze of its tunnels, which is to say the arc of its history. A story enmeshed in secrecy, some of it still secret, much of it now illuminated by declassified documents and interviews with key actors, though never fully told. How did we get to this second coming of nuclear panic? How did we wind up with thousands of nuclear weapons, far more than any war aims could justify? What propelled the nuclear arms race during the decades-long Cold War? And what happened to the weapons and their guardians after the Cold War ended? And how and why did any of this persist? Chapter 1, Killing a Nation. 10. The book Fred Kaplan's The Bomb. You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thom Hartmann here with you. By the way, Kurt Volker is going to be one of the people testifying this week. That'll be on Tuesday afternoon, on tomorrow afternoon. And there is just a pile of evidence that he lied to Congress when he said, I didn't know, anything about Trump and Giuliani and all this stuff. No, we didn't have a clue. We didn't know. And by the way, just to let you know what else is going on in our program today, in our next hour, the second hour of the show, Congressman Ro Khanna will be with us for the entire hour taking your calls. He's on the House Oversight Committee, by the way, Elijah Cummings Committee. And, and they're also part of the impeachment inquiry. So it should be fascinating. So, be thinking about that if you have specific questions for Congressman Khanna. And in our third hour, we've got both David Brock, who is the founder of Media Matters for America, and talking about what Fox is up to, and Craig Silverman and Shepard Smith and this talk radio host who was fired in Denver. And also at the bottom of the hour, Dr. Ben Strauss with Climate Central. We're going to be talking about the state of things with our climate. It's a fun-packed day, as they say. So anyway, your thoughts on all this stuff. Pauline in Los Angeles, listening on KPFK. Hey, Pauline, what's up?
Hi. Hi, Tom. I didn't hear everything that your other caller had asked, Sam, but what I'm wondering about your idea, your theory, is that if they were to try to do that and Pence were to pardon Trump and Trump's family... Oh,
it wouldn't require a pardon. If he did it under the 25th Amendment, he would simply be allowed to remove himself from office. Oh, I'm sorry. You're saying if Pence pardoned him after he did it. Yeah, okay, I'm back with you, Pauline. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, you said that then the Democrats could drop the investigation, the impeachment, and everybody can just try to, I guess, negotiate or something from there.
Right.
But I think that would be a big mistake for the Democrats. I think that the Democrats are still, even now, in a hard position, but I think they have to continue to investigate and expose Trump and actually try as best as they can to expose his brand. His brand should be synonymous with corruption and with corruption, basically.
So as in for posterity?
Well, if he gets pardoned, can't he just run again?
No. He can't. Well, actually, no. If he was impeached, he can't run again. If he steps down because of the 25th Amendment, and then he comes back and says, okay, that heart condition I had, it's gone now. Yeah, conceivably. I really think, though, that I don't think he ever wanted to be president. And
right, that's true.
And I think it's hurting his brand and it's hurting his business in some ways. And I think once he's out, he was supposed to start a right-wing television network in January of 2017. He had two things that were going. He had signed letters of agreement on both of them. One was Trump Tower Moscow, and the other was this right-wing television network, loosely called Trump TV, and that was going to compete with Fox and all these kind of things. I think that he'll just go back to doing those things. That's what he knows. That's what he loves. That's what he's good at.
Well, that's what needs to be stopped, though. That's why his brand has got to be exposed, because not just for prosperity, but because the Republican Party now is the party of Trump, whether they like it or not, and they're going along with it. So therefore, it is. And he doesn't just stop. He figures a way to squirm out of whatever immediate trouble or emergency he has, but that never stops him. And he will always be wanting to vindicate himself, even if he's admitted, like recently admitted, that he stole money from that's the charity or whatever for the VAs, the veterans. That doesn't stop him even when he admits it. If he can, until he has like handcuffs and is put behind bars, he would even organize behind bars. I'm sure. Nothing.
I think so. He's a mob boss. The guy.
Yeah.
He's a New York City mob boss, or a wannabe mob boss.
His legacy is everything to him. His ego is everything to him. So, it's not just enough to just even impeach him. People have to realize that this is where our country is at. We're broken, and this is a brand that is taking over the narrative of our politics. And so his brand is very dangerous. It's not just about his money and stuff like that. It's much more now. So I think that the Democrats now, or in your scenario, your theory, have to continue to impeach and make this investigation open up to the general public. It's kind of like,
I'm just not sure how they do that, Pauline, because if he leaves office, it would, Congress can investigate anything, right? We learned this from Benghazi and Hillary's emails, but.
Well, Pompeo and Barr should be, the shoulds, let's say Pompeo and Barr and Pence should be impeached. They should just, like you said, continue to impeach. Yeah. They have to make the case somehow. They're going to have to make the hard decisions. These people are all involved with this impeachment.
Yeah, no, I get it. I get it. And in theory, I completely agree with you. The politics of it are going to get a whole lot weirder if that's what goes on. But who knows? Pauline, thank you for the call. Marilyn in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Marilyn, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I completely agree with your theory. However, I think what drove him to the hospital was not cardiac symptoms. I think he had a TIA. He has shown
a mini stroke.
A mini stroke. We've seen him before become a phase that can mess up words and make words, not just word salad, but could not pronounce words.
You're right.
I think he probably had one that was a little bit too long to let his doctor feel comfortable not taking him in for an MRI.
Right.
And it would also be the perfect excuse. The Democrats are persecuting me. It's putting so much stress on me that I have to get out of here.
Yeah.
For the good of the country and my family and the world and whatever.
Right.
So I think it was probably
that
TIA.
makes a lot of sense. That's a transient ischemic event or accident, or what's the A stand for? Attack.
Attack. Yeah.
Okay. So
also, excuse me 1 second. I want to add one thing to make my point. We saw video of him walking to the Suburban with this doctor. Had he had chest pain, even if it was resolving, they would have found a way to get him into the Suburban, not walking. He would have been in a wheelchair. They may have had to do it, in a garage or something like that.
Right.
But that doctor would have been committing career suicide to put the president, who had just had symptoms of a heart attack, let him walk to the car.
Yeah, that makes a good point.
That's the other.
But with a mini stroke,
the symptoms are gone.
Right, and
the symptoms are gone.
So the symptoms pass, the event passes, and then how typically is that treated? Is this the result of a clot where you need to put them on blood thinners, or is this a result of a rupture, a bleeding event where they need to not?
Usually if you have a bleeding event, the symptoms persist. But he's also had this decline in his mental status. Yeah. His dementia may not be Alzheimer's. It might be multi-infarct dementia. The same risk factors that could cause a heart attack, plaque, can cause a TIA. It's probably through a little piece of plaque and it cleared or the vessel spasmed.
So bottom line, he's eating too many cheeseburgers. The goo is getting clogged up in his brain. It's causing these little mini strokes. We've seen several of them on television when he couldn't pronounce the word origin and he kept saying the oranges of the FBI investigation. When he was slurring his words at one of his events. He's done it 3 times that I can think of. So apparently he's having, and if these things happen frequently, every time they happen, a little tiny piece of the brain dies, right?
Right, exactly, and that would advance the dementia. I saw this in my mother as she deteriorated, and the guy's going to keep banging the birders. He's not going to listen to anybody.
Right.
And it's treated by diet, by statins, by exercise, all the things he's not going to do because he's a stable genius.
Yeah, he'd have to become a vegan, basically.
Well, not a vegan, but he certainly can't be living at McDonald's.
Yeah.
And, and he's got to lose the golf cart, just stuff like that any reasonable person would do, and he won't do it.
Right.
So that's my theory.
That makes a lot of sense, Marilyn, and I think you're absolutely, you have completely convinced me of that theory. I think that makes absolute perfect sense. And I'm surprised, frankly, that the TV networks, they had Sanjay Gupta yesterday on CNN. And, we've all seen what looks like these TIAs, these mini strokes. We've all seen this with our own eyes on live television. And I'm surprised that they didn't pull up, a few clips of that and say, of course, I guess they don't want to be sensationalistic. They're trying to, all this kind of thing. But then the question is, let's say he actually is having mini strokes, has over the last couple of years, and now does he use this as his get out of jail free card under the 25th Amendment?
There is evidence that, persistent mini strokes eventually lead to the big boomer, and he may be getting ready to go stroke the boom. Who knows? Yeah.
And which would be another reason to reduce the stress and leave the White House. Yeah.
Exactly.
Marilyn, thank you for the call. Thank you very much. It's great to talk to a medical professional when we're talking about medicine. And thank you for being a nurse, Marilyn. We need more of them, more of you in the world. We'll be back with more of your calls and the news of the day in just a moment. By the way, it looks like there's another pay-for-play ambassador.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
This one's the guy who wants to be the ambassador from the Bahamas, and he also gave $1 million to Trump, and now the RNC wants him to cough on another $500,000. Oh, there we are. And welcome back. Carol in Eagan, Minnesota. Hey, Carol, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. Not a medical professional, unfortunately. However, it was really interesting to listen to your lead-in because Mike and I have been talking about this, and he posited the same thing, that this is Trump's first act of getting out of the presidency scot-free.
Right, with no conviction and no impeachment and nothing dirty on his, and it's how he got out of the Vietnam War. So, clearly he would be thinking like that. Pardon my interrupting you, Carol.
That's okay. But I have some questions, and maybe these are some things. Could he pardon all of the people that have been convicted, Stone and Manafort? Could he pardon them now, and then when he leaves office, Pence pardons him and the family? What I see as the problem is that Pence is just as guilty as he, and I don't know, Mick, would we have to, I think we'd have to start over with another impeachment if Pence was suddenly the president.
I think, you raised a couple of different issues there. I think that if you're looking for an analogy, you would find it with Reagan and Bush the elder. Reagan, obviously committed a number of crimes that involved Iran and the hostages and all this stuff to defeat Jimmy Carter in 1980, and then, to be able to ship arms to the Contras even after Congress passed a specific law forbidding him from doing that. Reagan committed major crimes, major impeachable offenses, and George W. Bush, or George Herbert Walker Bush, was part of that, and there was plenty of evidence of that. And Lawrence Walsh, who was the special prosecutor at the time, was investigating that, and he was closing in. He had just subpoenaed Bush's diaries, and this was in December of 1992. And Bush had just lost the president, his reelection bid to Bill Clinton. in November. So here we are, a month after Bush has lost. He's leaving office in a few weeks, in 2 weeks. It's December 24th. And his Attorney General, Bill Barr, says if you, and there's this prosecution, and it's still going on, right? They've already gotten convictions of Elliott Abrams, conviction for Caspar Weinberger. I mean, you know, they've already gotten several convictions, right? And Lieutenant Colonel Ollie North. And so Bill Barr says to George Bush the elder, he says, just pardon all of them, and they'll have no witnesses to prosecute you. And it'll shut down the investigation into what Reagan did. And so Bush did that. He pardoned all of them. And
so you Clinton, can pardon somebody before they're convicted?
That's correct. That's absolutely correct. That's what Jerry Ford did with Nixon. Nixon had not been convicted of anything. And he gave him a blanket pardon for all crimes committed any time. And, you know, there was all kinds of things that they could have gone after Nixon on. I think we're going to talk to Lamar about that on Friday this week. So okay. I see Trump pardoning the people who, you know, Flynn and Manafort and Stone. And then the next day, and he would do that probably the day before he leaves office using the 25th Amendment. And then the day after Trump leaves and Pence is sworn in, Pence immediately pardons Trump and his kids, and maybe half a dozen other people who might be potential witnesses against Pence. And then, you know, everything collapses. Carol, thank you very much. That's a great call. I appreciate it. We'll be back. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. How would these pardons work? You know, how did Trump and Pence both wiggle out of this? Because clearly both of them have committed crimes. And I just want to very quickly recap what I shared with her. I think that the template for this is 1992. In 1992, George Herbert Walker Bush was president. This is December of 1992. George Herbert Walker Bush is president. He is leaving office in 2 weeks. So this would be like after Trump gets declared, you know, too physically incapacitated to be president of the 25th Amendment, okay? So in other words, leaving office, but not under a cloud. However, there was an ongoing investigation. Lawrence Walsh had already obtained, he was the special prosecutor for Iran-Contra. And they were looking into both Reagan and Bush's involvement with the Iranians holding the hostages to screw Jimmy Carter, the Lebanese holding hostages, the Iranians getting weapons from the Reagan administration, and in violation of a law that Congress passed while Reagan was president, Reagan selling weapons to the Contras down south and shipping cocaine back into the United States. They were looking into all that stuff. And Lawrence Walsh had already gotten convictions of Ollie North, of Elliott Abrams, and of Caspar Weinberger, and there were a couple of others that he'd gotten convictions on, names that are kind of lost to history. And he was preparing to prosecute George Herbert Walker Bush. And he had just subpoenaed Bush's diaries. So this is the Mike Pence scenario, right? If Trump gets removed from office under the 25th Amendment, he gets a no foul, you know, no problem. You get to go, buddy. See you later. Everything's good. And then And frankly, I would predict that before Trump leaves office, his last day in office, he will pardon Stone, Manafort, and Flynn. Okay, then Trump leaves. And then Pence doesn't just pardon Trump, but he takes the same advice that Bob Barr gave to George Herbert Walker Bush. Bob Barr famously, just Google Bob Barr's name and my name, and you'll find several articles I've written about it with links back to the original New York Times articles on this stuff from 1992. But Bob Barr told, the question was, should I just pardon these, Caspar Weinberger, or should I just pardon? I mean, who should I pardon? Should I pardon anybody? And Bill Barr, told him, pardon all of them. In fact, his phrase was, "In for a penny, in for a pound." This is in 2001, what he told an historian who was interviewing him about what happened in '92. And you can find, if you Google Bill Barr and Thom Hartmann, you'll find the articles. So my guess is it would be the exact same thing. Trump pardons, the big-time criminals without pardoning Michael Cohen, who flipped on him. Then he leaves office without a conviction. And then Pence pardons everybody who might testify against Pence, as well as Trump and the Trump crime family. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Terry in Alachua, Florida? How do I say that, Terry?
Alachua.
Okay, you're on the air. What's up?
Hi, Tom. I totally agree with everything that you and the callers have been saying about. I think his doctors have been knowing about his medical condition for a while now, and I think once he's left office, he's been pardoned. Then what does he do? Don't you find it odd that he changed his legal address to Mar-a-Lago in Florida? And I think that was done on purpose, because once he's out of office and they have him recuperating, if he has to file bankruptcy, if he's as broke as you've talked about him being,
right,
and he has to file bankruptcy, in Florida, you get to keep your primary residence.
Right, which would be Mar-a-Lago.
Which would be Mar-a-Lago,
which
exactly.
is worth probably hundreds of millions of dollars right now, and so that would be a principal way to preserve his assets. I agree. In fact, I've laid that theory out on this program in the past. I think you're absolutely right, Terry. People were speculating that he moved his legal residence to Florida to avoid state income taxes or to try to avert prosecution from the state of New York. I don't think it's any of those things.
That might be true, too, but I think the main reason is the bankruptcy law down here. I
think he's preparing for a bankruptcy, and I'm guessing that if we ever get a good insight into his finances, his taxes and things, we'll discover that he has been shoveling money to his three kids. To three of his children, maybe to Barron as well, but I doubt Tiffany's getting any of it. But that he's been shoveling money to them to lock it up and get it out of the way in anticipation of he himself. And he'll do it the same way he bankrupted his casinos, by the way. He will claim it's not a personal bankruptcy, it's not me, although it probably will be, but he'll do it in a way that, at least in his mind, saves face. Terry, thanks for the call. Spot on. I think you nailed it. We'll be right back. Congressman Ro Khanna is up next.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Our book for today on the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Kingdom of Lies, Unnerving Adventures in the World of Cybercrime by Kate Fazzini. This is from the preface. It didn't take me long in my career as a cybersecurity executive to figure out everyone was lying to me. The biggest lie of all came at the very beginning, that cybersecurity is hard, too hard, certainly too difficult for someone who lacks years and years of deep technical training. That is no place for writers. That thicket of incomprehensible jargon alone seemed meant to discourage outsiders like me from entering the field. They told me I could never hope to understand the terminology unless I'd worked around it for a very long time, unless I had a special and complicated certification, unless I knew how to take apart and reassemble a computer, unless I knew how to code in Python and could read it, interpret it, and spot problems on sight. And if I somehow managed to learn the lingo, the learning curve for the rest of it would prove insurmountable. Lies, lies, lies. It's unfortunate because there's a huge gap between the demand for cybersecurity workers and the people available to fill those jobs. I think one of the reasons for that is because people can't imagine themselves doing this kind of work. Can you use a smartphone, make a PowerPoint, think on your feet, ever organize a night out to the movies with your friends that went well and nobody crashed their car to or from the event? Welcome to the 21st century's hottest career path. Are you able to charm the pants off women? Did you escape an abusive marriage? Have you ever hosted a toddler's birthday party at your home? Honey, I want you on my cybersecurity team. After reading the stories in this book, you will understand that what makes cybersecurity complicated is the complexity of human beings. So if you know how to deal with people, you can handle internet security. If you understand what makes people tick, not only will you be able to recognize a threat, you'll be one step ahead of your adversary. During my career as a cybersecurity executive at multinational corporations, a journalist for Wall Street Journal and later CNBC, and a professor at Georgetown University, I've met a lot of fascinating people. From the hackers who perpetrate malicious attacks to the security professionals who try to prevent these incidents from happening, and the alphabet soup of government agencies that do damage control. At the end of the day, they're all fathers, sons, mothers, sisters, and spouses. In other words, people just like us. Yes, the white hats cross paths with black hats and change alliances more frequently than you might expect, but they're driven by the same desires as the rest of us, even if sometimes it feels as if everyone in cybersecurity is allergic to the truth. As a professional, I was told a great many lies about the field I have grown to love so much. After becoming a journalist on the cybersecurity beat, I was told even more. Here are a few. Let me introduce you to the hacker community. This lie is usually delivered with a wink and a nod from someone who thinks they know every hacker on the planet. The truth of the matter is there is no hacker community. Sure, the guys who make a splash at the big annual conferences might say otherwise, but every country, every state, every faction, every identifying group has its own community of people who hack computers. Some of them are extremely conservative. Others are massively liberal. Some fall in between. Some wear suits and ties and work as lawyers during the day, while others look like everyday citizens and have great people skills as they pursue the idiosyncratic agendas. Some are good guys who got fed up with the low pay and boring duties and became criminals. Some are criminals who ended up being good guys. Many start and end their careers on either end of that spectrum. Some, including many you'll meet in this book, are extremely proficient hackers who have no time or inclination to identify with any community at all. As a journalist, I was astonished at the number of people who came out of the woodwork to offer me exclusive access to the hacker community. I couldn't help but notice that the members of the source's hacker community were often people just like him or her. My point is there are many different types of people working in this field, and I can guarantee you that a lot of them are exactly like you. Here's another lie. He's a luminary in the cybersecurity field. He's probably not. Fame and luminescence don't typically intersect in this field. The people I've met who are actual geniuses aren't famous, and most of them don't have social media profiles. They tend not to pontificate on areas outside their expertise. The people who are constantly headlining conferences and who are so often offered up to me for interviews have less insight than those who stay underground. Anything a high-profile hacker is willing to share typically carries with it a massive and crystal clear agenda that I've learned to spot from a mile away. Even if a conversation is off the record, the intel coming from a top government official or other marquee corporate cybersecurity name carries little novel information. The only people who have illuminated the way for me in this world, and in this book, have been genuine practitioners who never held a C-level title. You've never heard of them, and because I've changed their names to protect their privacy, you probably never will. They are luminaries not because of the degrees they've collected or the events they've headlined, but because they carry a lantern that guides the path for others. These types of people typically don't have a public relations team. One of my favorite lies, he doesn't know what he's talking about. This one is usually delivered by someone who asserts that he or she knows the cybersecurity field better than anyone else. These people will brag that they know what it's like to be a hacker and can do things that no one else in the room can do. I'm always wary of those who try to establish their bona fides by discrediting the expertise of other cybersecurity professionals. The depth and breadth of this field is so vast that anyone who works in it is an expert at some part of it. And I have yet to meet someone who is an expert at all of it, not even close. Every view of an incident is informed by the reviewer, what he sees, what her level of expertise is, and that changes over time. It's like asking someone who lives in the plaza to describe Manhattan. The book is Kingdom of Lies by Kate Fazzini. You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
By Greg Grandin.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to our second hour. Congressman Ro Khanna is here with us for the hour. He represents the 17th District of California, Silicon Valley area, and he is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He's also on Elijah Cummings' House Oversight Committee, among others. His website, Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna, R-O Khanna. And Congressman Khanna, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me on. Sounds like you've had quite a interesting first hour.
Yeah. The first hour we were talking about, why did Trump go to the hospital on Saturday? My most cynical take was that maybe he's setting up a 25th Amendment, because the 25th Amendment was passed in '65 after Kennedy was shot, to deal with, what if he hadn't been shot in the head? What if he had just been shot in the chest or something and he was out of commission for 6 months? There's no mechanism in the Constitution for the vice president to take over. So let's put this into the Constitution. So, if Trump claims that he had a little mini stroke or something like that and he leaves office, it's just like his bone spurs, got him out of Vietnam, in another medical deferment, basically. And then Pence, and then on the way out, he pardons Stone and Manafort and Flynn, who could, conceivably in the future testify against him or his family. And then Pence comes in and pardons Trump and the whole Trump crime family and anybody else who might be able to testify that Pence had any role in all this, which is exactly what George Bush the Elder did in December of '92 on the advice of then Attorney General Bill Barr. So that's our theory. Anyway, what do you think?
Well, I appreciate you pointing out Bill Barr's role in '92, the December Christmas pardons to let off anyone who was involved in Iran-Contra.
Yep.
I don't know whether Trump's going to do that now or run through re-election, but I do think that whenever he loses or whenever he leaves office, that's a very likely scenario that he would first pardon everyone, transfer power to Pence for a few weeks even, and then have Pence pardon him and everyone else. And it's why, it's going to be hard to get criminal prosecution against him and why we have to do our jobs in Congress to hold people accountable.
Yeah, and we set a bad precedent, I think, in '92 or '93 by not looking back at Iran-Contra, and then again in 2000, I would argue that we set a bad precedent by not looking back at the war crimes and things, but that's a whole another rant, I suppose, for another day. Anyway,
and someone has to look at the pardon power, and I don't think it can just be absolute, and that was the framers' intent. I mean, that it's really been abused.
Yeah, it was the one kingly power. It was sort of the sop that they threw to Alexander Hamilton. But anyway, okay, let's pick up phone calls for you. You got a bunch of them already. By the way, if you just tuned in, Congressman Ro Khanna is with us. He's with us for the hour taking your calls. Phil in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, listening to WRRD. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hello, gentlemen. It's my honor to speak with you.
Thank you. My
question is in regards to the far-right nationalist movement that's really getting a strong foothold, I think, in our Republican Party. What's your take on Gavin McInnes's relationship, the Proud Boys, and some of these far-right racists and their relationship with Roger Stone, Ted Cruz, and how much is Trump aware of and involved with this?
Phil, is deeply disturbing. I mean, my understanding is that the president and his team view that base as, quote unquote, their last defense, that is the base that is going to stand up for the president even when others leave him. They have become more mobilized, more vocal in the Republican Party, and particularly in low turnout Republican primaries. And it's one of the reasons that my colleagues have been reluctant to speak out against this president in any way.
Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hello, Ro. Congressman Khanna. I wanted to ask, there are two pieces of legislation that were passed under George Bush, and one of them was the Postal Service have to require 75 years to pay in advance on the retirement plans. The other one was the stimulus or the tax breaks that for offshoring corporations. In this new Congress, have you taken any steps to correct either one of those legislations? And I wanted to thank you for being involved with J.D. Scholten as well.
I appreciate that, Randy. We have taken steps in terms of trying to get rid of the tax deferral, which incentivized corporations to go offshore. The Progressive Caucus has a budget that says that if a company has foreign earnings, they should be taxed at the full corporate tax rate. Unfortunately, Trump did exactly the opposite. What Trump's tax cut bill did is allow companies to go offshore and pay no tax, not even having a tax incentive. It's just basically if you're offshore, you don't pay tax. So it's going to require a progressive president to reverse that, to help make sure that you're paying tax if you're overseas. And on the post office, similarly, there are a number of progressive bills that the House has introduced, but we don't have a Republican Senate or a Republican president willing to sign that. And J.D. is terrific. He's going to flip Steve King's district in rural Iowa and be a great progressive legislator in Congress.
Wonderful. Paul in Glenside, Pennsylvania. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Congressman. I'd like to discuss the what I consider to be the imperial presidency and just so much absolute power that lies within the hands of the president. In particular, the presidential pardon. I understand it's a part of the Constitution, but so are a lot of other things that aren't there anymore. I really think it's time to, if Congress has any hope in the future of truly holding a president accountable, that they have to get rid of the presidential pardon and set up a federal commission for clemency and for determination of false prosecution. You can't hold Trump or anybody responsible for any kind of crime when they have a magical wand to get out of jail for everyone around them who's committing crimes at their behest and then eventually can lead up to them. I think Congress needs to announce that it's time for this to be over with, and it's time to move into the 21st century of modern governance. You just can't have a guy that can do that. Anybody, the next 10 presidents for that matter.
Well, I completely agree with you. I mean, we were just discussing that earlier. Tom, did you have?
Yeah, I had a question that I wanted to add to that. You know, the Constitution says that, you know, it talks about the pardon power, and then it says except in cases of impeachment. And to the best of my knowledge, that has never been adjudicated by the Supreme Court or any other court. And does that mean that when a president is under investigation for impeachment, that during that time he can't issue pardons? I mean, if so, or if the Democrats were to take that position and publicize that position, that might encourage the guys that we know are waiting for pardons, Manafort and Flynn in particular. I mean, Flynn has changed his whole legal strategy to being all Fox News all the time, and probably Roger Stone as well. That might incentivize all three of them to actually turn on Trump because he's lost his pardon power. On the other hand, if that means that he can't pardon himself from impeachment, I mean, I don't think that anybody knows what that means, or do you? Do you know what that means?
No, I think it's ambiguous, and it's unclear whether it would just mean himself, because presumably, I mean, impeachment is about removal from office. It's not about a crime. So I don't think it could have meant just don't pardon yourself, because you could be impeached and you're not still convicted. My sense is it's probably more broadly there to prevent the president from intimidating witnesses or people who would give evidence that in a trial, or preventing him from luring them into giving false testimony. But you're right that it hasn't been litigated, and it's something that Democrats should do and see if we can get the Supreme Court to weigh in. And to the caller's question, to Paul's question, I mean, I completely agree with him. The power of pardon should be given to a federal agency and not to one person. The Congress should try to do something with the states. It would require a constitutional amendment to change that. And we also remain the only Western democracy that doesn't have an independent agency to deal with corruption. I mean, you can't have Congress, people like me and the Oversight Committee, responsible for holding government accountable for every corrupt activity. In most other countries, they have a whole agency that isn't directly accountable to the president to do that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, too. Congressman Ro Khanna is with us, taking your calls for the hour. He represents the 17th District of California. He is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And his website, Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro, R-O, Khanna, KHANNA. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
More of your calls for Congressman Khanna in just a moment. It's 16 minutes, coming up on 17 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Morris in Long Beach, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good morning, everybody. Hey, Congressman, we got a resurrection going on here, and I'm not talking Jesus. The Mueller report. I understand that since Roger Stone has now been convicted, a lot of stuff y'all couldn't get to, you can get to now. And I understand that your impeachment inquiry attorneys now are requesting some things in some courts, right? That's going to lead directly to the president. And they thought that thing was dead. It's coming back to get them. So when you talk about some new articles of impeachment, because there's one thing that's not going to get them, the thing with Ukraine, because they keep moving the goalposts. All right, so your new articles have got to come out of the Mueller report, and he thought it was there. There's a resurrection of it. Do you think I'm crazy? Do you think there's something coming out of that?
Well, Morris, I agree with you that Roger Stone's conviction shows that there was a lot there in the Mueller report. It's very clear that the Russians interfered. It's very clear that there was a coordinated effort on these WikiLeaks to try to embarrass the Clinton campaign. And I believe that both the Mueller report about the Russia fiasco and the current situation with Ukraine is evidence that this president has basically used the apparatus of government and foreign power relationships to benefit himself politically and to hurt political rivals. And that should be the story comprehensively that Democrats tell, and that is the grounds for our impeachment.
Tim in Houston, Texas. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good morning, y'all. I've got a quick question or two for you, Representative. It's got to do with the Constitution and the three branches of government. The Constitution begins, "We the people," which basically means you representatives should be the ones ruling the roost. However, everybody keeps saying, well, no, we've got three equal branches of government, meaning you can pack the Supreme Court just like the Republicans have done already and taken all our rights away from us. And I was wondering if is there any chance of planting a germ of an idea in anybody's head to have the Democratic Party run on that plank? And the next thing is,
Tim, let's you get one question. So and we only have a minute to the break. So let's see what Congressman Khanna has to say.
Tim, you're on to something. Our slogan in 2018 was "For the People." It was based on the preamble of "We the People," and our campaign in 2020 is going to be that we need to return our democracy to citizens, and that there has been corruption at the highest levels of government, corruption with the special interests. Our democracy is broken, and the Democrats are going to stand up for returning democracy to people again. Put very simply, I think any of our candidates will have that message.
You know, I was just reading the Article 2 here, and it said, he's talking about the presidency. He shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. And just before that, it's talking about he's the principal officer of all the executive branches. I'm wondering if they were thinking that the president can't pardon one of his junior officers, like the Secretary of State, who's being impeached, right? I wonder if that's what they meant.
No, it's ambiguous, but I'm sure that's what Trump's team would argue, unfortunately.
Yeah, it seems to make sense. We'll be right back with Congressman Ro Khanna. Stick around. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Ro Khanna on the line, taking your calls for the hour. And Stephen in Albuquerque, New Mexico, you're on the air.
Yes, in line with what you've been talking about, I was wondering if the Constitution says the president's not above the law, then don't the pardon powers allow the president to be above the law?
David, that's a great point. I do think the pardon powers are one of the things that are similar to monarchical powers that are above the law. And as Thom Hartmann pointed out, Alexander Hamilton in our founding wanted a much stronger presidency. He felt that the president had to have some king-like powers. In most places, he lost the debate. But this is one place where the president did get this power. And, there's the famous, you go back to The Merchant of Venice, there was this romantic ideal of the king being able to grant mercy, grant a pardon in cases of where justice may have been denied. Of course, that's not how the pardon power has been used. It's been used to abuse justice, not to grant mercy for people who seek it.
Reginald in Houston, Texas. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, Thank you. You know, Dr. King said that America was the biggest purveyor of violence in the world, and we have since 9/11, and Eisenhower talked about the military-industrial complex. That Pentagon budget has been increased, and every administration has increased it. And we could take an aircraft carrier and maybe pay for the new Medicare for all that that's Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders is talking about. If we were to audit that, why wouldn't we audit it? And why is both Democrats and Republicans giving this unchecked military budget to go and create wars everywhere? And it seems like they're pushing Trump to do wars, and maybe they're upset because he's not doing war or likely to go to war like the previous administrations, because we have to keep that engine going to feed that beast at the expense of tearing up other countries and not repenting from that. Can we audit that budget and hold ourselves accountable?
Well, Reginald, one can believe in the importance of America's role in the world and have great respect for our military, and still believe, as I do, that our military budget is out of control. When Bill Clinton left office, we had a military budget of about $400 billion. We're now talking about a military budget of $738 billion, $100 billion of which is an overseas contingency fund, which is designed to fund potential wars that haven't even been authorized by Congress. So I completely agree with you that instead of having these massive increases in our military budget, and by the way, Trump has increased the military budget almost $100 billion since Obama left, we'd be better off putting that money towards having free college, towards having Medicare for all, towards having a real infrastructure bill, and having universal broadband. That should be our priority.
Anthony in St. Augustine, Florida, you're on the air.
Hello, yes. I got a question for you. Wasn't there an agreement back in the late 1980s, early 1990s between Secretary of State James Baker and Mikhail Gorbachev that in exchange for the breakup of the Soviet Union and the reunification of Germany, that NATO would not move any further east?
Anthony, it's a very thoughtful question. I've asked that actually in the House Armed Services Committee. The reporting suggests at least that was Russia's understanding, that we wouldn't be increasing the eastward expansion of NATO. I don't think it was ever formalized in an agreement, but that certainly seemed to be the parties' understandings. It's why I don't think it makes sense to be pushing for Ukraine or Georgia or other Baltic states to be part of NATO.
Congressman, we just have 30 seconds before we're going to hit a hard break here. How do you see this our relationship with Russia and with Ukraine working out?
Well, I think it's going to require, of course, diplomacy. I mean, I believe that Russia was wrong in their invasion of Ukraine and in taking Kiev, but we need to push to make sure Russia allows Ukraine to have sovereignty, and then see how they can be negotiated so that they're allowed back in eventually into the G7, but not before they acknowledge that the invasion was wrong.
Yeah, I think you meant Crimea, not Kiev, right?
Crimea, yeah.
Okay. We'll be right back. It's 27 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Ro Khanna, Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, taking your calls for the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And we will be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Khanna in just a moment. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Cokeland, The Secret History of Coke Industries and Corporate Power in America by Christopher Leonard. This is from the preface. On May 18th, 1981, 4 Wall Street bankers traveled to Wichita, Kansas. They went there to make an offer to Charles Koch, the CEO of an obscure mid-size energy company. The bankers from Morgan Stanley wanted to convince Koch to take his family's company public, offering shares for sale on the New York Stock Exchange. Their deal was squarely in line with the conventional wisdom of corporate America at the time. Going public was seen as a natural progression for companies like Koch Industries, offering them access to big pools of money and promising enormous paydays for the existing team of executives. All it required from the CEO was to surrender control. Morgan Stanley, in return, would collect a small fortune in fees. Charles Koch was 45 years old. He had run Koch Industries since he was 32 when his father died suddenly. He was trim, tall, and had an athlete's build. He spoke quietly in meetings and seemed almost passive. The bankers laid out their plan to take Koch public. They revealed what, to most executives at least, might have been the most significant detail. If Charles Koch agreed to the deal, he could earn $20 million overnight. The bankers seemed incredulous when they prepared a confidential memo about Koch's reaction. He does not want this cash, the memo reported. Charles Koch calmly explained to them why their offer made no sense. His company was breathtakingly profitable. It operated in vital, deeply complex corners of the American energy industry. During the 1980s, Koch Industries was the largest purchaser and transporter of U.S. crude oil. It owned an oil refinery. It employed teams of commodity traders who bought and sold a wildly diverse menu of raw materials and financial products, from gasoline to paper futures contracts. This might have encouraged most CEOs to take their company public. Koch Industries, however, did not want outsiders to know how much money its traders were earning. Taking the company public would expose too many of its secrets. The memo said, certain of Koch's commodity traders are particularly worried that their high salaries, once disclosed to the public, would be used against them by their trading partners. Secrecy was a strategic necessity for Koch Industries. Charles Koch did not want to surrender it. He also didn't want to surrender control. He had a specific, clear vision of how to run his company, and he didn't need Wall Street investors to interfere. If the bankers expected Charles Koch to go along with the conventional wisdom of their time, then they, like so many outsiders, did not understand him. Beneath his low-key veneer, Charles Koch was, at his core, a fighter. He had unmovable ideas about how things should be, and he did not back down when challenged. When he was challenged by his own brothers for control of Koch Industries, he fought them in a bitter legal battle that lasted decades. When he was challenged by members of a powerful labor union during his first years as CEO, he fought them even as they committed an act of industrial sabotage that nearly destroyed Koch's oil refinery. When the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into Koch Industries' oil gathering business, Charles Koch fought them with every legal and political tool at his disposal. When a liberal Congress and President Barack Obama sought to impose regulations on the fossil fuel industry to control greenhouse gas emissions, Charles Koch fought them in ways that changed U.S. politics. In each of these fights, Charles Koch prevailed. When Charles Koch dismissed the bankers in 1981, it was just a small skirmish in the larger war to control Koch Industries. After prevailing in that fight, he created a company that was true to his vision. He avoided the snares that entangled many publicly traded companies that report their financial results to investors every 3 months. Koch Industries didn't have to think quarter to quarter. The company thinks year to year. An internal think tank and deal-making committee called the Development Group will sometimes think through a business deal on a timeline measured in decades. This long-term view made Koch more nimble where other companies stumbled. In 2003, for example, Koch Industries bought a group of money-losing fertilizer plants when no publicly traded company was willing to take the risk. Today, those plants are as profitable as a broken ATM machine that spews out cash around the clock. Unlike publicly traded companies, Koch Industries does not pay out rich dividends to investors. Charles Koch insists on reinvesting at least 90% of the company's profits, fueling its constant expansion. This strategy laid the foundation for decades of continuous growth. Koch Industries expanded continuously by purchasing other companies and branching out into new industries. It specialized in the kind of businesses that are indispensable to modern civilization, but which most consumers never directly encounter. The company is embedded in the hidden infrastructure of everyday life. Millions of people use Koch's products without ever seeing Koch's name attached. Koch refines and distributes fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel, on which the global economy is dependent. Koch is the world's third largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer, which is the cornerstone of our modern food system. Coke makes the synthetic materials used in baby diapers, waistbands, and carpets. It makes the chemicals used for plastic bottles and pipes. It owns Georgia Pacific, which makes the wall panels, beams, and plywood required to build homes and office buildings. It makes napkins, paper towels, stationery, newspaper, and personal hygiene products. Koch Industries owns a network of commodities trading offices in Houston, Moscow, Geneva, and elsewhere, which are the circulatory system of modern finance. The book, Kochland, by Christopher Leonard. Welcome back. Congressman Ro Khanna is on the line with us, taking your calls for the hour. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, represents the 17th District of California in the U.S. House of Representatives. And Harlow in Pocatello, Idaho, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thank you, Tom, for taking my call, and thank you for your service, Congressman.
Thank you.
My question is, the funds for Ukraine were released and authorized by Congress to be paid. Was there a date set for them to go to Ukraine? Or is this what set off the whistleblower because he knew the money should have been sent, and everybody was like, why wasn't the money sent?
Well, my understanding is that the money should have been sent soon after the July 25th call, and it was delayed and wasn't sent until September. And in fact, there is testimony from some of the witnesses based on the public reporting and the depositions that money should have been sent, that there was concern of illegality, that the money was being held. And this is why a number of individuals like Laura Cooper and others were going to senior people at the National Security Council concerned that the White House was breaking the law.
Joe in Cupertino, California, you're on the air with your congressman.
Thank you, Tom. Tom, let me just say thank you so much for introducing Randy Rhodes to me, because I just was going to throw out Navgas. Is that the name of the company that was in Ukraine that was providing natural gas for, I guess, from 91 all the way up till today?
Yeah, Randy's brilliant.
Yeah. And, Congressman, I just wanted to give a shout-out to that Safe to Tell Act, the EGLE Act of, H.R. 3714 for the gun safety violence for the high school kids out there. I'm just really concerned about that every day. At any rate, I'm really grateful to have this representative democracy. You're on top of everything. And I had an opportunity to speak with Parmila Jayapal last week, and we were discussing the difference between Bernie Sanders' bill and H.R. 1384. Here I see over the weekend that you've come out with what's the State-Based Universal Health Care Act. It's amazing how these ideas spread from Maryland to Michigan. My question, sir, is can we look at this from a regional standpoint? I mean, with the Washington, Oregon, California, possibly Nevada, maybe a Western regional approach to try to deal with what is really something that we're doing really well in our county. I mean, in our county here in Santa Clara, the provider is pretty much the county, and the insurance is affordable. It's expensive, but it's affordable, and it's going to be even more affordable in the future. But we all participate. I would say we probably have an 80 to 90% insured in this county, and I think that we could demonstrate that nationally. Maybe we wouldn't have such resistance. It's up to you to try to spur this as you do support Bernie's Medicare for All plan.
Well, Joe, I appreciate your calling in and referencing my bill to give states the ability to do single-payer systems. When you look at why Vermont, which tried single-payer, failed, it's because they could not get the federal funding waivers. They weren't allowed to use Medicare and Medicaid money to design their single-payer system. And the problem is you can't have a single-payer system that only covers some individuals. You can't have a system of having Medicare, Medicaid, regional, and the state covering those who are left out, because then you'd have four systems. You wouldn't have the administrative cost savings. You wouldn't have the overbilling savings. So you need to have the states do everyone under one system, but you can't expect them to do everyone under one system and not get the federal funding for Medicare and Medicaid. It'd be impossible for states to do that. And so what my bill does is allow them to use the Medicare and Medicaid funding if they're guaranteeing 95% coverage and better benefits than what the federal government guarantees. This is how single payer started in Canada, where Saskatchewan showed that they could do it, and I'm hoping states like California, Vermont, Massachusetts can take the lead to put more pressure on the federal government to have a federal system.
That is brilliant, Congressman. Thank you for doing that. Alexis in Brookline, Massachusetts, you're on the air with Congressman Ro Khanna.
Hi, I wanted to ask about oversight because, as we well know, there has been zero oversight of the Trump administration so far. And I'm hoping that that will end up being part of the articles of impeachment. But let's just say that our worst nightmares happen and the Senate lets him off the hook. What does the Democratic caucus plan on doing to ensure continual oversight of the Trump administration if he's left in power?
Election, it's a great question. It's something on our minds in the caucus. We're hoping still to make a very aggressive case so that the Senate doesn't acquit. But if the Senate does acquit, one danger is that this president may feel even more emboldened to defy any subpoena, to defy any oversight function. We're still going to be very, very aggressive in the Oversight Committee over accountability of the EPA, accountability of the immigration agencies, accountability on the Emoluments Clause. But I share your concern that if this president is acquitted by this Senate, he's going to feel more emboldened to violate this Constitution. That is why I hope some people in the Senate will do their constitutional duty and check this president.
Randy in Gardnerville, Nevada, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good day, Congressman Khanna. Does a pardon
Randy.
Good morning. Does a pardon preclude testifying?
Does a pardon preclude testifying from the president's behalf, you mean?
On the part of the person that was pardoned.
Oh, no. I do not think that a pardon in any way prohibits a person from testifying, but I think what you're seeing is that people are not testifying against Trump because they are trying to get pardoned, and they don't fear being held in contempt of Congress or obstructing justice because they're calculating that Trump would pardon them for those crimes.
James in Shawnee, Kansas, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thanks for taking my call. Shawnee, Kansas, home of Sharice Davis, the new blue wave Democratic representative.
Cool.
Congressman, my question regards the Senate's ability to hold a secret vote. There seems to be a lot of confusion, and there's no real definitive answer. What does it take for the Senate to approve a secret vote on articles of impeachment?
James, I do not know the answer to that question, and I don't want to give you a false answer. I will have my staff looked into it, and if you contact our office, I'm happy to look into it. Tom, I don't know if you know the Senate procedure.
I read an article about it in the New York Times last week. That's my understanding from reading that article, and I don't have any beyond that, was that it's a matter of amending the Senate rules under which they're operating, and that the Senate can change its rules with a majority vote. So it would just take, 51 votes, I guess, something like that, change the rules. And then if the theory is that if they had a private vote, that there's probably 20 or 30 Republicans who would flip on Trump if they weren't accountable for the vote.
Yeah, I do think that would likely be the case, that some Republicans and even possibly a majority would flip on Trump. I'm skeptical that McConnell would allow that to happen, that kind of private vote, because he's 15 points underwater in his own state, running 15 points behind Trump. And if he were to do that, he would lose all of Trump's base. So as a political matter, I'm unfortunately skeptical that McConnell will let that go forward.
Yeah, I think your analysis is probably absolutely accurate. Michelle in Capitol Heights, Maryland, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good afternoon, Professor Hartmann. Thank you for taking my call again. And good afternoon, Congressman Khanna.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
So Professor Hartmann, you were speaking earlier about pardons, and I know that those have been brought up as well while you were on the call, Congressman. But I'm just using a little bit of my legal brain that I have, and I just want to say that if the president or if Mr. Trump pardons any of the players that are participating, as well as if something were to go along with your theory, Professor Hartmann, about Mr. Pence pardoning people. Under the United States Supreme Court case Burdick versus the United States from 1915, the Supreme Court ruled that an acceptance of a pardon is an imputation of guilt. And so you're basically confessing to the crime that you were pardoned for. Is that not correct?
That's really interesting, Michelle. Well, I appreciate that insight. I did not know that case. I do think that that's a point that Democrats need to be making more clearly, that these individuals looking for a pardon are basically admitting that they're guilty of the crimes that they're being accused of. It's a very interesting point.
Joy in Crescent City, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good morning. Thank you so much for taking my call. Where I live here in Crescent City is the location of Pelican Bay Maximum Security Prison. And right now, inmates are being used to fight the California fires, and they're only getting paid $1 an hour. And what I'm wondering is if there's a way that they could actually be paid either minimum wage or a larger wage, and that money could be saved in an account that is given to them when they are released from prison. I gave a parolee a ride. I picked up a parolee in April, and he was given $200 to walk off the prison grounds, and he had to buy his clothes in order to leave. And he is actually back in prison now. And so my question is if it would be possible to pay these prisoners more money, then they could have money when they get out of prison that could help that transition and maybe prevent some of these recidivism rates. And I'll take my question, your answer off the air. Thank you very much.
Joy, thank you for that eloquent statement. I agree with every word of it. I've been speaking out against the inhumane treatment of these prisoners. They are having to fight these fires at some personal risk. They're being paid $1 a day, far below any market wage. We should be paying them for this labor, and they should be able to have that savings so that when they get out, they have some shot at starting a meaningful life and don't have to resort to crime again.
It's 45 minutes past the hour. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. He's the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 17th District of California. His website is Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. And you can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And just as a heads up, in our next hour, both David Brock and Dr. Ben Strauss, the climate scientist, will be with us. We'll be back. And welcome back. Nathan in Omaha, Nebraska. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, both of you. I don't have a question so much as I wanted your general sense on Cenk Uygur running for Congress, which I just heard over the weekend. I know, no, just from both of you, actually.
Sure.
Well, Nathan, I have supported Cenk. I've known Cenk for many years. I believe he has a clear vision on supporting Medicare for all, a $15 minimum wage, most importantly, getting private money out of our politics. He's done a great job at the Young Turks Network of mobilizing progressives around the country. And so, I know him and like him.
I would say the exact same thing, and in fact, I would even go so far as well, I shouldn't say I endorse him right now because I have no idea what the race is and I need to look at it, but I would, generally speaking, in principle, I would endorse Cenk for anything. I've known him for years.
And I have endorsed him, out of full disclosure. I have endorsed him. In
that case, then I'll endorse him too. So here we go. We're in agreement on this. Joe in Santa Barbara, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Congressman. Thanks for taking the time out to talk to the people. My question is about the Patriot Act. Does that come up for any kind of review?
Joe, it does, and I don't know when the next review is. I, of course, was opposed to the Patriot Act. By the way, one of my heroes in politics, Russ Feingold, I think was one of the only no votes originally against the Patriot Act because he foresaw how intrusive it would be, and it set the stage for some of the mass surveillance and data collection that we're dealing with now, not just with the federal government, but also the corporate actors. But every time that it has come up in Congress, there are those of us in the progressive community who try to repeal the excessive parts of it, and we're going to continue to try to push for that.
Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna. We have just a little over a minute to the break, Norma. A quick one.
Well, I wanted to ask him why he thinks a patchwork deal of health care, of letting the states choose, is going to work. Because when they gave people, the states, the option to expand Medicaid, it did not happen here. We've had 8 outbreaks of tuberculosis, 2 outbreaks of hepatitis A. Everybody here across the South is underemployed. They're classified as part-time, temporary, seasonal, and they can never, ever afford any kind of a health insurance policy, but they can afford to go to the doctor on expanded Medicare for all. And when you deprive them of the opportunity of getting expanded Medicare for all, you also deprive them of freedom because they can quit their nasty job and go somewhere else because they would still be covered under expanded Medicare for all. We cannot afford to have sick people walking around serving food or cleaning your child's desk.
Norma, let's let Congressman Khanna respond.
Well, Norma, I actually agree with you. I mean, first of all, let me just be clear. I am for a federal government, single-payer, Medicare for all, improved Medicare for all for every person. And I agree with you that one of the consequences of states doing single-payer would be that many states wouldn't do it. My only point is if we could get California, Vermont, or Massachusetts to do it, it will put more pressure on the federal government to make sure that we have single-payer in every state. But I completely agree with your concerns about some states not being willing to do it.
Yeah, and for 11 years on this show, that was Bernie's suggestion, was individual states do it, and pretty soon it'll go national. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Video over at thomhartmann.com. It's just available to people who are members of, supporters of our program. And welcome back. Congressman Ro Khanna is taking your calls. And Julia in Auburn, Washington, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. Thanks for taking my call. So I read Rahm Emanuel's piece in Politico last week, and he talked about how the Democrats need to win is addressing nuts and bolts issues like fixing the roads and doing things like that, rather than the big progressive agendas of Medicare for all and the Green New Deal. And I wanted to get the congressman's point of view on that.
And Julia, I read that too. Democrats win when we have vision. First of all, Medicare for all single payer is not an idea that is new. Harry Truman proposed this. Lyndon Johnson tried to get it done. Ted Kennedy in 1971 proposed a health care single payer for all bill that the Nixon White House scored as being 66% of national health expenditure. It means it would have saved 33%. That was Nixon's health department that did this. Jimmy Carter in 76 runs on a national single payer mandatory bill and wins. And, of course, Ted Kennedy challenges him in 1980 in the primary, partly because he didn't think enough progress had been made on this. So this is something we've been for as a party for 50 years. We've had candidates, very successful candidates, win on it. And I think the Democrats have to stand up for our principles and explain why we're for this. We believe health care is a human right. We don't believe that the for-profit motive is going to deliver. We think that in this country you have 17% of our GDP for health care, double what other countries have, and yet we don't have better health care outcomes, and that we're going to save money and provide better benefits from single payer. And we need to stop attacking Democrats or providing a Democratic vision and using Republican talking points. That, in my view, is the problem.
Bill in Clifton, New Jersey. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, hi. I just want to quickly mention to Tom that the 25th Amendment, I think, requires a full complement of cabinet members.
Yes,
we don't have
but
that.
If I see what you're saying. There's so many acting members that it can't be done.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think that's been adjudicated. But anyhow, to your question.
But yeah, with health insurance, we were able to limit the profitability under the ACA. We could bring that down to zero so they become nonprofits again, and that would save a lot of money. The other thing is if we lower the Medicare age to 50, the pool of healthy people would be so high that the cost would go down really low.
The second point, meaning if we expand it to 50, you're saying, Bill?
Yeah, he's suggesting that if we lowered the age to 50, you'd have so many healthy people who wouldn't be sucking money out of Medicare, yet they'd be paying into it.
Well, Bill, I appreciate your first comment about debating what it takes to invoke the 25th Amendment is just reinforcement about how, Tom, you have one of the most informed audiences of any show. I appreciate the point on Medicare for 50. Look, I'm for Medicare for all, but Warren's plan and frankly even Sanders' transition starts out with going to Medicare to 55, Medicare to 50, and that step is in the right direction of getting to Medicare for all.
Greg in Mountain Home, Arkansas. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, hi, Congressman. I was wondering if you saw the L.A. Times article on the Marshall Islands people, and after all the nuclear tests, like the Bikini Atoll, and we allocated $3 billion to help the people, but we've only given them $4 million. And I was just curious if you knew if there's any plans to help them along.
Greg, I haven't seen that article. I appreciate your raising it. If you write into my office, or I'm happy to tell my staff to look into it to make sure that we do what we said we would.
Congressman, we just have 45 seconds until the end of the hour. Your thoughts going forward on what we should be looking for, where we should be focusing our activism?
Well, I would say, Tom, two things. One, on the impeachment, we shouldn't concede that the Senate is just going to acquit. Some of the testimony that keeps coming out recently of Mr. Holmes, that the president basically admitted to wanting these investigations. We need to keep driving home that narrative and making the case as strongly as we can. And then on health care, I believe it's so important that we get the facts out about single-payer health care, how that's been something we've been advocating as a Democratic Party since Truman, almost for 70 years, and how it's, in my view, the only way to lower costs and get universal coverage.
Yeah, that was absolutely brilliant. I'm going to ask you for that summary of Carter and Kennedy and all those other people offline. But Congressman Khanna, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
It really is. And it's great talking with you. I really appreciate it. We'll be back. We're going to talk with David Brock after the break about what's up with the media in America.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Separated by the Border, a birth mother, a foster mother, and a migrant child's 3,000-mile journey by Gina Thomas. This is from the introduction. How good is your Spanish? And would you be able to take in a 4-year-old girl? She's from Honduras and speaks minimal English. The social worker had texted me on a Friday afternoon. I sat at my desk, bent over my cell phone, reading and rereading the text. My thoughts traveled to Honduras, bachata, ballades, clothes hanging on the line. So many things in our lives seem to have prepared us for this moment. My son was attending a bilingual school. I'm a former ESL teacher, and my husband Andrew and I speak Spanish. Plus, Honduras already had a piece of my heart. As those thoughts came, I tried to push them away. The voice of logic came in loud and strong. We had just gotten into a routine with Emma, our foster daughter. 2 foster children and 2 biological children would be too much for us to handle. Our first month as foster parents taught us this, and for the sake of everyone involved, we knew it would be very unfair to try that again. A little later, the social worker called and left me a message saying, "It looks like the Office of Refugee Resettlement, the ORR, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, will get her on Monday in court. It'll only be the weekend. Call me back after you talk to Andrew." I asked Andrew when I got home, "We can manage 4 kids for one weekend, right?" He said he doubted it would last only a weekend, but I convinced him that if ORR and ICE were involved, they would get her on Monday. A few minutes later, I called our social worker and said that we'd do it. When I walked into the social worker's office, Julia was sitting there in a brand new bright pink Barbie t-shirt. The social worker said they'd found the t-shirt in their clothing closet and Julia wanted it. Beautiful, soft onyx curls framed the girl's umber face. Her dark complexion made me speculate she was from a coastal region. She stood in dirty flip-flops next to the social worker's chair, chit-chatting away in Spanish without a care in the world. "Julia's been talking my ear off," the social worker said. "She's so sweet, but I have no idea what she's saying." Another worker brought in a black tote bag with a few other items from the clothing closet, including a pair of sequined high-top sneakers that Julia had picked out. I began to speak to Julia, pronounced Julia, in Spanish. She seemed happy to hear her mother tongue, but her body language didn't budge. I read that signal loud and clear, so I kept my distance and sat down on the floor. "¿Cómo se llama?" I asked. "Julia." "¿Cuántos años tienes? How old are you?" "Cuatro, 4. She looked older than 4 to me. I had been told her parents were deported and she was left behind. She was under federal jurisdiction. I would find out later this was all misinformation. I signed some papers and said, we'll see you on Monday. I asked Julia if she would come stay with me and my family for the weekend. She smiled. I told her I had 3 other kids. Her eyes expanded with excitement. On the drive home, she jolted my Spanish from its slumber. The social worker wasn't kidding about how much this little one talked. On April 6, 2018, U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced a new zero-tolerance policy in which the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice would partner for the sake of prosecuting illegal entry into the United States. Sessions said, quote, "If you cross this border unlawfully, then we will prosecute you. It's that simple. If you smuggle aliens across our border, then we will prosecute you. If you are smuggling a child, then we will prosecute you, and that child will be separated from you as required by law. If you don't like that, then don't smuggle children over our border," end quote. 6 weeks later, almost 2,000 children had been separated from their parents at the border since the zero-tolerance policy took effect. When Sessions announced the administration's new policy, I couldn't comprehend the cruelty. I also wondered if it explained why a preschooler was living under my roof. Julia had come to live with me and my family in February of 2018, and it felt surreal to be a part of her story. She had first been separated from her mother, Guadalupe, called by her nickname Lupe through the rest of this book, by smugglers who were paid to bring them across the border. Julia had then been separated from her stepfather, Carlos, by U.S. Customs and Border Protection, likely because what was recognized by the Honduran government as stepfather was not recognized by the U.S. government as the same, a detail I didn't understand until an immigration expert read the first draft of this book and explained it. Julia had already suffered much trauma, and separating her from her stepfather had only inflicted more. The weight of the trauma that we, as a nation, began inflicting on vulnerable children and their parents was cruel and unusual punishment. When I heard that my own country was going to begin separating children regularly from their parents as a policy, it broke me. Reality became surreal, and Andrew and I learned to live in it, separating the trauma from our emotions so that we could survive. As the veil of Oz is ever lifting from my white evangelical American eyes, what I now see is simply heartbreaking. Government-secured human rights are mostly for privileged white people. Julia is not white. Julia is undocumented. Julia's first language is Spanish. Julia is a girl. These are all labels that set her back in a society made by and for white, passport-holding, English-speaking males. But God, who is neither white nor male, despite my use of the pronoun he, shines his good news on every human being alike. The book is Separated by the Border by Gina Thomas. Presidential term with a formidable 77%. Yeah. You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Breaking news, the Supreme Court has just said that they will pick up the case of whether Donald Trump is required to turn, or at least his accounting firm is required to turn 8 years of his taxes over to the Attorney General for the state of New York. So they've basically frozen his taxes. They were supposed to be released on Wednesday. That was the lower court ruling. And, you know, we'll see how this plays out, and we'll keep you informed on that. On the line with us right now is David Brock, the founder and chairman of Media Matters for America, the author of 6 books, including The Fox Effect, which is absolutely brilliant. MediaMatters.org is the website. You can tweet him at David Brock DC or MMFA, which is the Media Matters Twitter account. David, welcome back to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
Sure. Craig Silverman is this talk show host in Colorado, in Denver, and he was on a Salem broadcast station, and he's claiming that they took him off the air because he was basically not doing the Trump line with regard to impeachment. He was questioning this. The management of the station has come out and said they took him off the air at the time that they did because he just announced that he got a job on another station on another part of town, and therefore they were going to pull the plug on him. I don't know which is true, but we've got that, and we've got Shepard Smith, talking about the impeachment and getting all kinds of flack from the president for that. I'm curious, in your mind, what role do media takeovers play in facilitating the rise of the kind of authoritarianism that Donald Trump is embracing around the world? We've seen virtually all the media in Hungary, for example, Viktor Orban's Hungary now owned by Orban's oligarchic buddies. What's the relationship there, and what are your thoughts on these things?
Well, I definitely think there's a relationship. I mean, just take the Murdoch empire itself. What's happening really is that, all these conservative-owned networks are having a really hard time covering the impeachment, including Fox, and that was why Shep Smith had some problem. And I don't know what the situation was with this radio host exactly, but it wouldn't surprise me if they're trying to enforce kind of a pro-Trump line in these media. But it's difficult because the facts aren't really on the side of the Trump forces. And so they're down to, circulating conspiracy theories or saying that the witnesses are just hearsay when, in fact, we now have a witness who has firsthand knowledge. The Trump defense is very weak at this point, and I think you're seeing that through the media. Fox is struggling with how to cover this because there is actual news here, and so they're forced on the one hand to acknowledge that there's news, but, they're trying to figure out how to sandwich in some of the pro-Trump spin, but the pro-Trump spin is weak. It's inconsistent. President wants his allies to say one thing. They seem to not want to say that. They want to go in another direction. So it's a little bit of a challenge for these conservative media outlets right now, which includes, most of talk radio and includes Fox and includes Sinclair in the United States. So I think that's the fundamental dynamic we're seeing.
The Salem Network is the one involved in the Denver thing. Talkers Magazine puts on this annual convention for people in the talk radio business, and I've attended them for, 15 years or so. And at one of them, and then they have luncheons, and at one of them I was sitting next to a vice president. I believe he was in charge of programming at Salem Radio Networks. And I pitched my show to him. I said, we're not Christian unfriendly on my show, and but we've got a progressive political perspective. And he very candidly said, there's no way you would ever be put on Salem Network. We are owned by our money comes from Bible publishing. We are a conservative company, and we are only going to put conservatives on the air. Period. Full stop. A U.S. senator and myself and the billionaire co-owner of another network of radio stations, I don't want to name this one in particular because this was in a private meeting, but that company owned something over 800 radio stations. We specifically asked him, would you consider putting progressive programming on any of your stations? Hundreds of his stations were carrying right-wing programming. And he just came right out and said, I will never put anybody on the air that wants to raise my taxes, basically. We only program conservative. And then you look at the rise of Murdoch. I mean, recently, I think it was maybe a year ago in the Sydney Morning Herald, Kevin Rudd, the former Prime Minister of Australia, wrote an article. The headline of it, the title of it was, Rupert Murdoch is the cancer at the center of Australian democracy. And he talked about how Murdoch owns over half the media in Australia now, the print media, and has corrupted Australian politics, and then moved to the UK and repeated that and corrupted their politics, and then moved to the US and repeated it again. This media landscape is increasingly looking like the product of oligarchy to me, and one that would not be friendly or functional in a highly functioning democracy, something that the founders might be pretty horrified by. I'm curious your thoughts on all that. I mean, you've been right at the center of all this with Media Matters for a long time here.
Yeah, well, that's, some years ago I wrote a book called The Republican Noise Machine, which had a lot to do with the subject you're raising now. And that was one of the reasons why we started Media Matters, which was back then kind of a voice in the wilderness, blowing the whistle on the fact that, media ownership is part of the problem here in terms of the Republican Party line coursing through all these networks. And, we saw when Sinclair was trying to expand its footprint, one of the things that Media Matters was able to do through its monitoring was to expose these, they call them must-runs, the editorials that they run across the Sinclair network, and they're verbatim. And it becomes a situation where, right-wing media has changed in the Trump era to become almost a propaganda outlet for the White House. So it's not just conservative media. It's really in the service of a particular leader and political party, and I think that's somewhat new. Fox has morphed from being, obviously extremely unfair and unbalanced from putting out just conservative views to really slavish devotion to Donald Trump, and we can see that affecting the way people are taking in the information about impeachment. You've got two different worldviews. You've got two different realities playing out there, which is very different than was the case in Watergate. And even in the Clinton impeachment, Fox was just getting its sea legs then. But now you can tune into Fox and get a completely different reality than what is happening actually in the hearings themselves.
Where does this take American democracy, and do you see any kind of a solution for this? I mean, is this Howard Dean, for example, on Chris Matthews' show suggested, this was years ago when he was running for president, suggested that it's time to say that at law that media companies have to be only media companies, that, MSNBC, for example, could no longer be owned, back then it was General Electric, by a company that wasn't a media company. And basically breaking up the big media conglomerates all around the country, and that we need to basically undo the 1996 Telecommunications Act and go back to local ownership rules. Is that a solution to part of this problem?
Well, certainly that could be a solution, and I think that we'd obviously have to have different political actors in power to put that on the agenda. But that is certainly one answer. Another is, I think, just the constant effort that we do at Media Matters to shine a light on what's going on these networks. The idea is that propaganda, when it's exposed to the public, it has less of an effect once they realize what it is, and that's what our mission has been. But it's an uphill battle, because Fox is more powerful today, really, than it's ever been. Because of its alliance with Trump, and because Trump watches Fox and then tweets what he sees on Fox, and at the same time Fox is taking the lead from Trump. So it's a vicious little feedback loop where you don't really know which one is dictating the other, but it's a combination of both. And it's very corrupt, and it's very, as you said, it's a real threat to democracy. And some of us, Al Gore and others, have been calling this out for some time. You can't really have people making correct decisions in the voting booth when they're consistently misinformed. And of course, it goes beyond just the platforms that you mentioned, but it goes into these social media platforms too. And there are some proposals to break up some of these big tech companies, partly for the same reason that they refuse to accept responsibility as publishers and allow and foment misinformation to be reaching out to the public. And we saw that in 2016, and I'm afraid, we're going to see a lot of that in 2020 as well.
Yeah, serious concerns. If you want to keep track of it all, MediaMatters.org is the website. David Brock, the founder and chairman, also the author of 6 books, including The Fox Effect. David, thanks for dropping by today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate
it. Me too. We'll be right back and continue our conversations from the day on what's going on with Trump and impeachment and everything else.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back, 17 minutes past the hour, here on the True People's Media. And welcome back. Let's see here. Jared in Downingtown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jared, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. I have a question about what is going on in Bolivia. Mm-hmm. And here is what I think is going on in Bolivia. There was an operation after World War II called Operation Condor in Bolivia. And it was basically that the U.S. would support any far right-wing regime in Bolivia to impose a brutal neoliberal agenda. And that's what I think is going on currently, that it never really ended.
And it was never just limited to Bolivia, was it?
Oh, it was the whole South America.
I thought it was the entire hemisphere. I mean, it was kind of an extension of the Monroe Doctrine.
Basically. And the CIA and everything else. And now we're seeing it in a modern form, basically, with you have, in Venezuela, they're trying to overthrow the democratically elected president there.
Right, Maduro.
Trying to overthrow the democratically elected president in Nicaragua. And now they just did it in Bolivia, which has been on the target list of regime change by the U.S.
Yeah.
And if you look
but that's
some of these,
Jared, you are familiar that, I mean, you do realize that the Constitution of Bolivia said that the president, Evo Morales, could not run for another term. Just like our Constitution, the term limit.
The Supreme Court ruled those were unconstitutional.
Oh, they did?
Yeah.
Before he decided to run for re-election.
Years before he ran.
Okay.
Years. This is a big lie. Mm-hmm. This is a big lie we are hearing. This is the big lie. And this has been spread. And now we're seeing things like I'm reading about the Human Rights Foundation, and there's this movement called Extinction Rebellion. Right. That is actually being part of the globalist agenda that overthrew Morales by claiming, he's not doing enough to stop the Amazon forest fires, while ignoring what Bolsonaro is doing in Bolivia, that he's causing the fires to explode.
Wait a minute, you're saying that the Extinction Rebellion folks are like throwing sand in the gears, disrupt things. You're saying that they're being funded by what, the fossil fuel industry or something?
By Western imperialists.
What's your evidence of that, Jared?
I don't have any evidence per se, but it's pretty clear at this point that if you lead the Gray Zone Project about Extinction Rebellion and all these other organizations, you will find that they are, in fact, taking their orders from the Western oligarchs.
That's very interesting. It's like the Revolutionary Communist Party, operating under like pseudonyms and things. Fascinating. Jared, I'm going to have to do a little more of a deep dive on all this stuff, but thank you for the call. It's always informative talking with you. I think, we had the foreign minister of, Ecuador on last week, I believe it was. You can check it out on YouTube. We'll be right back. It's 21 minutes past the hour. In our special video for our supporters, for people who support us, welcome back. This, by the way, this hour brought to you by xchairtom.com, xchairtom.com. Tim in Chenley Park, Illinois. Hey, Tim, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing? And listen, your last the guest that you had on from Media Matters, he was saying that people were accusing the impeachment hearings of being hearsay evidence, and he proved that by saying we finally have somebody that's come forward that pretty much proves that all we've heard so far is hearsay, and now we finally have somebody coming through. I see this media whole thing as 99.9% the Democratic Party ABC, NBC, CBS, NPR, you name it, is in the Democratic Party's camp. And then you have this little teeny island called Fox News, which dares not to, march lockstep with the progressive agenda, and therefore they must be stamped out any way, shape, or form. And
so you're seeing a grand conspiracy here, Tim. Hang on just a second. Tim, you're seeing, let me understand this.
I'm not talking about conspiracy. I'm talking about what I watch on TV.
I don't mean this to diminish what you're saying at all, and I don't mean conspiracy in a derogatory way. It sounds like what you're arguing is that there is collaboration or something, coordination, something between 3 different networks owned by 3 major corporations that are all, the essence of both U.S. and multinational capitalism, and presumably NPR is part of that, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and newspapers all across the country. The Wall Street Journal, even the Wall Street Journal has been reporting on Trump's, apparent crimes. And that's owned by Rupert Murdoch, and the New York Times and the Washington Post. That you see all this stuff as basically a conspiracy to what? To get Trump, or to get the Republican Party, or what is this conspiracy? The goal of this group?
Well, I can't believe that you don't see that there is a pure divide in this country between people who are conservatives and people who are not conservative. So I don't even know what you call them anymore. The progressives, they're the left wing, they're AOCites or whatever.
Well, you're not answering my question. What's the goal of the liberal conspiracy here that seems to have taken over America?
I would have to say to make sure that everybody lives as they do, whether they like it or not.
Which means,
that's what I would say.
For example,
if you don't want single-payer health care, we're going to force it on you. If you don't want to have your taxes taken away from you, well, we'll just find some way to call you something horrible and get you terminated, fired, or whatever, and you won't have a job. It's not conspiracy theory. It's just watching the world develop in a way where you can't even agree with me that ABC and NBC and CBS and all of their programming is not conservative. When you say that you're not anti-Christian or whatever you said, you're a Christian-friendly radio station, I would absolutely disagree with that. We've had conversations you and I have had that was just basically you putting the phone down on me because I wouldn't agree with your theological ways. And I just think that the progressives can no longer hear opposition, and that's a problem with me.
So the whole point, the whole goal of this liberal media conspiracy is to force Americans to have better health insurance and higher taxes.
A utopia. How do you pay for free stuff? I tell my children.
How does Canada do it?
Well, let's see. Why do people from Canada come here for their better surgeries?
They absolutely don't, Tim.
Yes, they do. My friends are from Canada. Especially some of my hunter friends
from Canada. If you have friends from Canada, then you know that the Canadians love their healthcare system. The most beloved man in Canada right now, not right now, he's been dead for some time, is Tommy Douglas. He's Kiefer Sutherland's grandfather. He's the one who started their Medicare for All system in Saskatchewan back in the 60s. He's like a national saint. If Canada can pay for it, if France can pay for it, if Germany can pay for it, if Greece can pay for it, for God's sake, why can't we? What's different about us,
I will tell you that
Tim?
I'm not anti-Medicare for all. I am not. I just want to know how it's going to be paid for.
Well, it's going to be paid for by raising taxes, obviously.
Yes, by raising taxes. And then you're going to raise taxes because I drive a gasoline car and not an electric car. And you're going to raise taxes because I don't have photoelectric cells on my roof. And you're going to raise my tax. And it never ends. Look at California, Oregon. Look at every place.
Yeah, I live in Oregon. The quality of life is really great. Lots of people moving here. In fact, it's driving up property values.
A lot of people are moving out of California and moving into Texas, a conservative state. And that's happening in the South.
And look
inundated with people.
And look in Texas, the places that they're moving, by the way, the people who are moving to Texas, they're moving to places like San Antonio and El Paso. And they're moving to college towns. They're moving to progressive places that largely vote Democratic. Tim, thank you for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
What a fascinating perspective. All these big corporations getting together to force us to have good health insurance and higher taxes. Right. The corporations really want that. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten thinks Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The Undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the Undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabit in the space of the Undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, He knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. More info at thomhartmann.com or 800-856-1155. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Dr. Ben Strauss, President, CEO, and Chief Scientist at Climate Central. ClimateCentral.org is the website. You can tweet him at Ben_Strauss. Dr. Strauss, welcome to the program. Oh, he just vanished. Okay, all right. Well, in that case, I've got something else that I wanted to riff on about. So, are we going to let capitalism kill more of our children? I mean, I think this is actually a very important question. Smoking kills, and the worst part of this system that, you know, where corporations and industries can basically buy the legislation they want, buy the regulation that they want, is that it lets millions of Americans every year die from their nicotine addiction. Well, not million. It's I guess the number is about 500,000. Between 400,000 and 500,000 Americans die every year from nicotine addiction. And now the Trump administration has decided, apparently this was Donald Trump himself decided, after a 7-week, multi-million-dollar campaign, lobbying campaign by the tobacco and vaping companies, to allow these companies to continue to sell basically candy-flavored, inhalable nicotine, vapable nicotine, to, in theory, they say they don't sell it to children, but that, we all know that that's what's going on. And in fact, this probably goes back to research that was done some time ago that found that if young people, pre-puberty, get addicted to nicotine, it essentially rewires their brains in a way that makes it much more difficult for them to ever quit nicotine. And these guys are like just gung-ho for this. So I think this is something that we need to be talking about. But back to ClimateCentral.org. Dr. Ben Strauss, the President, CEO, and Chief Scientist with Climate Central, is now with us. Dr. Strauss, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So, 340 to 480 million people. Basically, you guys have come up with, or this new estimate was published in Nature Communications, efforts to refine NASA's satellite elevation data, found that the number of people who will be at risk from global sea rise change as a consequence of global climate change is tripled now from previous estimates. Do I have that right?
Yes, you do.
You want to elaborate on it?
Well, so really almost the whole climate science enterprise has been focused on how sea levels will change in the future. And rightly so. That's hard to get. It's the ball that's moving, and really impossible ultimately to predict with precision. But you need to know two different things to understand how many people are going to be at risk. The height of the future sea, but also the height of the land. And I think we all tend to assume that we know the height of the land, but it turns out that we don't know that so well for large parts of the planet. And past research that has done global assessments or assessments in many developing countries has relied on some elevation data from NASA collected by satellites, which provides what is called surface elevation data, meaning you get the height of the surface of the Earth that's closest to the sky, which includes treetops and rooftops. So on average, those elevations are really well above the true elevation at the ground, and the true elevation at the ground is what you need if you want to understand the risk from sea level rise and coastal flooding. And our contribution was to develop, using machine learning or a form of artificial intelligence, a new elevation data set for coastal areas worldwide that essentially eliminated this average error found in the NASA data, and we discovered a great deal more people are living on vulnerable land than we previously understood.
Remarkable. So our coasts are actually lower than we thought they were, or the land around them is lower than we thought they were. It's remarkable. Now this is just basically, the sea comes up and it invades the land essentially, and as we're seeing in Venice right now and in Miami Beach, people can no longer live there and they have to flee and all that sort of thing. But that's happening as a consequence of melting ice, and a lot of the ice that's melting is in glaciers around the world, which feed some of the world's largest rivers. What's going to happen when these glaciers finally melt?
Well, I'd say the biggest area of concern is looking at the Himalayas, and the rivers that they feed help to provide irrigation water and drinking water for probably well over 1 billion people in South and Southeast Asia. So as those glaciers melt, we will probably see a period where the water supply actually increases, because every year you have a freezing and snowing period and a melting period. But if the glaciers are stable, it means that on average you have the same amount of melt as you have snowfall. But if the glaciers are melting, you're adding that melt to the balanced equation. So there will be a period where water seems to be plentiful, but it will be followed up in the farther future by a period where the water supply is much less regular. There's a risk that people become used to having more water, and then suddenly the water becomes quite unreliable as those glaciers dry up, and then you're really subject to the whims of the weather each year. Was it a big snow year or a low snow year? And that could be extremely dangerous.
And then on top of that, as a consequence of global climate change, we find that precipitation events and wind events are becoming more extreme. So some parts of our country, some parts of the world are now experiencing as regular events what used to be considered 100-year or 500-year floods, and other parts of our country are now experiencing as regular events, and of the world, as regular events, what used to be 100-year or 500-year droughts are happening for extended periods of time. The west coast of the United States is in a 5-year drought now. Guatemala is, I believe, the 6th year of a very, very severe drought, a multi-100-year drought, and it's one of the things that's driving some of the refugees coming to the United States. I'm assuming that also is going to affect probably hundreds of millions, if not billions of people. Do we have any collective estimate of the number of people worldwide who are affected by global climate change, integrating all these different effects?
Well, I think one simple answer is that we're all affected by global climate change in different degrees in different places, but there's no place that is unaffected. We've simply changed the atmosphere and the climate for the whole planet where all of us live. You're also right to highlight that we will feel, and we are feeling, climate change most strongly in the extremes. And increasingly, we are able to detect a climate signal in specific individual extreme events. I should note that I think the jury is still very much out in terms of Central American, the drought in Central America right now. I recently saw some research suggesting that it was within the range of natural variability. I don't know whether an assessment has been done there, a formal assessment or not yet, and what that will show. But overall, we are definitely seeing an increase in extreme weather because of climate change, and even small changes in average temperature or average conditions can lead to large changes in the likelihood or frequency of extremes. I sometimes think of it, imagine standing on the beach, perhaps as the tide is coming in, and watching the waves wash up the beach towards your toes. And imagine every wave coming very close, an inch away, 2 inches away, but you never get wet. Wave after wave. Well, all you need is just a few inches of the tide coming in, or a few inches of sea level rise, and suddenly you'd be getting wet with every single wave. So you can go from a situation where the events when you're affected, or the extreme events, are very rare, to a situation where they're very common, even by just a small change in the average. And that's really something we're seeing all around the world today.
Remarkable stuff. Dr. Ben Strauss, the President, CEO, and Chief Scientist at Climate Central, climatecentral.org. Dr. Strauss, thanks so much for dropping by.
Thanks for having me.
Great talking with you. We'll be back in just a moment. And stick around. We'll be picking up your phone calls here. It's 44 minutes past the hour on the Thom Hartmann Program, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's the place where despair is not an option. I'll be picking up your phone calls in just a moment. And welcome back. David in Austin, Texas. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
How you doing, Tom?
Good.
I had a quick question for you. If, let's say, the president's criminal enterprise pardons everybody involved, is there a possibility that New York will still be able to prosecute him and get a conviction?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
The pardon authority only extends to federal crimes. He would have to have the governor of New York pardon him for crimes committed in New York. And that's one of the reasons that I'm guessing, my operating theory right now, I haven't talked about this much on the air, but you brought it up, is that, when Trump bails, he's got deals right now in process, or at least he had prior to the 2016 election. I'm guessing they could be picked up very, very quickly, in a number of countries where he could simply relocate himself and be immune from extradition to the United States. He could go to Moscow to build a Trump Tower there and supervise the construction. He could go to Riyadh and supervise the construction of one in Saudi Arabia. I'm not sure if we have an extradition treaty with Indonesia, but he already has a property there. He's got properties in a couple of the stand countries. Off the top of my head, I don't recall the exact ones. I think Kyrgyzstan is one of them. Places that, pretty much for sure we don't have extradition treaties with. So he's got a lot of hidey holes if he decides he wants to take off.
So him and his family would do just like dictators do, leave the country.
Yep.
Be deposed.
Yep.
Wow.
Baby Doc here, or Papa Doc, yeah, absolutely. We've seen this movie before, and I'm guessing we're going to see it again. David, thanks a lot for the call. Tim in West Palm Beach, Florida. Hey, Tim, what's up?
Hey, how you doing there, Tom?
Good.
I've got 3 points. One, I knew a lot of people, when the earlier gentleman talking about people coming into Canada for medical because they have a waiting list. There's so many people in line waiting, and they can come down here and get the same procedure done quicker, faster, sooner. That's point number one.
It's simply not true, Tim.
Yeah. It's simply not true?
It's simply not true.
And why is it not true?
they don't have long waiting lists any more than we do. I mean, here in the United States, if you want to have hip replacement surgery and you are not in an absolute crisis, it's probably going to take 6-8 months before it all gets set up. I had back surgery. It took 3 months just to organize the surgery. And I was in a lot of pain. I was taking, serious narcotic drugs for the pain every day. But still, it took a couple of months to set up the surgery. That's just the nature of things. I mean, we ration healthcare in the United States far more than the Canadians. We've got 30 million Americans right now who have no access to health care at all because they can't pay for it. We've got another 100 or 150 million Americans who are regularly put into economic distress by the fact that we're rationing health care based on your wealth. Canada, to the extent that they ration it, would be based on where you are on the line. And of course, any kind of an emergency procedure in Canada is instantly available to anybody, and regular routine doctor visits, easy. You see them the same week you make your appointment. But we're far worse in that department than Canada. So, Tim, I got to run. I'm sorry, the break caught us. Call again another time, and we can continue the conversation. It's 49 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where we ask, are corporations persons? Is Walmart a person? And we say, no, not a chance. And we need to fix that, by the way, with a constitutional amendment. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see here. Ivan in Bartlett, Illinois. Hey, Ivan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Hey, did you hear about Buttigieg scamming black voters in South Carolina?
What the story? Yeah, go ahead.
He claimed 400 prominent black folks in South Carolina endorsed him. Turns out half the names on his list were white, and most of the other names on the list never endorsed him. Now, Tom, if this were Bernie, he would be attacked all over the media.
Yeah, you're right.
With Buttigieg, crickets.
Yeah, there does seem to be a media bias toward so-called moderate candidates, candidates who are taking corporate money. And he's had a few other missteps, with regard to the African-American community. In one of his ads, for example, there's a stock photo that's actually from Kenya,
Right, that's part of that same report.
Yeah. On the other hand, I think he, with his Douglas plan, he's making a good faith effort to reach out to the black community. I just don't think he's doing it, with great competence. And we'll find out, right now he's banking everything on Iowa and New Hampshire, but then comes South Carolina, which is 30% black, and very, very, and about half of the Democratic electorate is African American in South Carolina. So, we'll see how this shakes out.
But imagine if this was Bernie, Tom.
Yeah, no, I'm agreeing. Or if it was Elizabeth Warren, Bernie is being largely ignored, and Warren is being largely attacked. I'm with you. In fact, Louise and I were at I keynoted a fundraiser for one of the local Democratic parties here night before last, and which was just great. It was a wild day. Friday night, I was in Los Angeles for Bill Maher's end of the year party, and it was great to see Bill again and to see some just some wonderful people there. And then I came back up here and keynoted this Washington thing. And they went through the list. They said, who are you supporting for president? Just applaud. And, you know, Bernie got wild applause. It was pretty impressive. I mean, everybody got some applause. And, you know, there's obviously fans for, you know, across the spectrum. But the progressive candidates got the majority of the applause, which I thought was really a good thing, basically. Lance in Fort Worth, Texas. Hey, Lance, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I missed Ro Khanna earlier. Now, did he say he was unequivocally against the putsch in Bolivia, or he was for it, or he was kind of sort of for it?
I don't recall the topic coming up. I think that came up afterward with somebody asking me about it, but I could be wrong. I could be wrong.
Well, the latest news is that the new putsch regime has issued two proclamations. One is that all members of the MAS party, that was Morales' party, that holds a two-thirds majority in the legislature, not only are they not being allowed to show up and do their jobs, which is to govern, they're now being threatened with arrest.
Wow.
And the new regime has given a blanket immunity to all soldiers and police, no matter what they have to do to keep the MAS party and anyone else, especially indigenous people, from protesting. So now fascists are going to fascist. That's just why they are. The only things missing here are the black shirts and the castor oil. Yeah. But what is really disgusting about this putsch in Bolivia is the way that so many people who can call themselves human rights activists, like Kenneth Ross of Human Rights Watch, they concern troll the hell out of the Morales government because he ran for a fourth term, even though by law he is allowed to. The Supreme Court there, which contrary to putsch propaganda, he did not appoint himself, they're appointed by the legislature, said that he could in fact run. He got their permission 2 years ahead of time before he ran, because that's what tyrants do. They go to a court and ask for permission to do something.
Yeah.
I mean,
I get the tongue in cheek.
When they had the night, So when they did that, and here's the final, the really galling thing about it. Morales' current term, even if you accept that the last election in October was totally stolen, he's still by law president until his term is up in January.
Right.
He was forced out by the Army. When the Army does not ask you to do something, they tell you. They have guns, they have tanks, they have artillery, they have planes. When they say you will leave immediately, that's what he did. It's like saying a bank teller who hands the armed robber the money was doing it voluntarily. No, they weren't.
So,
it was done under duress.
So Lance, what you seem to be unusually well informed on this issue. What do you think the U.S. policy should be on this?
Well, our policy in general throughout Latin America should be to butt out. And that means not just not supporting coups.
But throughout Latin America, you've got the same problem you have here in the United States, which is billionaire oligarchs corrupting and taking over the political process.
Yes, but our government doesn't do anything to stop that. Our government actually helps those oligarchs to terrorize their people.
My point.
Almost all the leaders of these death squads, almost all these putsch artists, almost all of these thugs are trained in America. They either have special FBI liaisons with American police departments.
Or they've been through the School of the Americas at Fort Benning. Yeah, I'm familiar. Lance, thank you for the call. It is an important issue, and like I said, last week or the week before, we had the former foreign minister of Ecuador on who experienced the same thing. His president got kicked out by a billionaire coup, essentially, which is apparently what just happened to Evo Morales, the first indigenous president. I mean, it's incredible. Anyhow, thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow. The first of the impeachment hearings. We'll see how it plays out, and I'll be offering my commentary and riffs on what the Republicans have to say. In the meantime, get out there, get active, and share with your friends how they can find progressive media. Tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit ThomHartmann.com.
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.